are live. Welcome to episode 1 of The Expert and the Idiot. We're here with Kenny Gall of KGReptiles. And today we're going to be going over a care guide on Peruvian and Surinam, right? That would be probably similar care for the two of them. If we can bust out 2 species with one care guide, that'll be cool. But just to get started, what got you to this point, being into snakes and reptiles? How long ago did you get into it, and what started the obsession? It's clearly an obsession based on what I'm seeing behind you.
My wife wouldn't call it obsession. I think she'd call it a financial drain.
Maybe those are synonymous.
It might be. So, if you watch podcasts, everybody kind of has a similar story. I was that kid that grew up, and I grew up in Bridgeport, West Virginia, and the house I grew up in had a creek that ran through the property. Yeah. And on the neighboring property, which is my grandparents, another creek joined that creek. It came to a Y. And I don't know why I was always fascinated with snakes and stuff, but as a young boy, I used to play in the creek all the time. I'm 54, so I was born in 1970. So back in the 70s, your parents basically just said, go. And if he comes back, well, then we'll feed him. If he doesn't, we'll make another one. So I was always out all day playing in the creek. And where those 2 creeks came together was a large rocky area where I guess all the soil had been washed away from floods or something. But there were snakes everywhere in there. They were just water snakes, Yeah. And I was always just down there catching snakes. And my middle name's Joseph. So when my mom was mad at me, she'd say, Kenneth Joseph, put that down. And so I'd always be down there playing with some sort of snake or whatever. I guess I'm lucky that copperheads weren't prevalent where I lived, because to me, I was 7, they were all just brown snakes. But my mom, I was that kid. So as I got older, we moved to a town called Salem, West Virginia, on 100 acres. And it was basically like a game preserve for a 10-year-old. Wow. And we had ponds, creeks, woods, everything. And I mean, there was everything you could ever dream of if you're a kid that liked to catch snakes and lizards and turtles and stuff. And then when I got older and my parents were looking at me with that look we all give our kids when they're 17 or 18, when are you getting out of my house and moving on with your life? I ended up joining the military. So there was a gap there. But my military time actually...
So real quick, did you keep any reptiles when you were a teenager, or?
No, my entire family, if snakes came into the conversation, it was only about how they killed it. My whole family hates snakes, and I'm pretty sure they'd like to send me off to some sort of counseling for why I'm the one person in my entire family that likes snakes. And my mom has come to understand them. So she'll actually walk in my reptile room and cautiously observed, and she scurries away. But they would never let me keep anything. We had dogs and cats like everybody else.
Normal people.
I guess. And I look at them as the unnormal people. Oh, you and your dog got it. But anyway, so when I went to see the recruiters, I was talking to all of them, and the only one that really appealed to me was the Navy, because he's like, look, you're going to see the world and you're going to go everywhere. And I did. And I was like, well, I'm joining the Navy. And so when I was in the Navy, I got the opportunity after my schooling to go to a ship that was going to be on the West Coast. And that was going to include Singapore, Indonesia, Australia, all these places. So I'd like to thank everybody that paid their taxes, because you paid for me to travel the world and see all these awesome places where the snakes I now own came from through the U.S. military. So I've been to Australia twice, Singapore, Malaysia, all those places. Nice. And that's when I kind of got seriously hooked, because then I got to see them. And, you and I are part of some chats and stuff, some forums. And I talk to my wife all the time about moving. I'm like, I'd love to move to Indonesia,
Sure.
But
so what did you see while you were there? Well, first of all, what was your job when you were in the Navy?
So I was a weapons tech. Back then they called them AWT, Aviation Weapons Tech.
Okay.
And I was on an aircraft carrier where aviation things happen in the Navy. So the ship I had gone to, which was the USS Abraham Lincoln, back then was brand new. It was still in the shipyard when I went to it. So it got to go to all these places because it was a new shiny toy for the U.S. military.
Yeah.
So they wanted to go show it off. So we went places we probably wouldn't have normally go in Hong Kong, all these places. Hong Kong was still British then. It wasn't owned by China.
Yeah.
So I went, it was British owned, but British controlled, I guess, probably. But anyway, so when I went to those places, I went to the Philippines numerous times. So when all the other sailors were hopping off the boat, saying which bar are we going to or whatever, I was trying to find somebody that would take me out into the woods and look for snakes and stuff,
Nice.
And you really didn't even have to go out to the woods. You could walk through town and see a retic crawling across the street,
Wow.
and you'd be like, oh wow, that's awesome. And that was back before I really even appreciated it. I kind of knew that was a retic, but I wish I could do it now. Now I'd like to go back.
Yeah, you took it for granted.
Kind of a little bit, because I'm like, I'm in the military. I'll be back here in 6 months,
Yeah.
Catch another one. But I remember going to the Singapore Zoo and seeing all the stuff and talking to the people, and it was awesome. So that really kicked it off. But you can't own snakes when you're in the military, or at least not the Navy. I lived on a ship, that would have been frowned upon. So it would have helped with maybe the rats, but anyway. Anyway, so then I exit the Navy, become a police officer in California, and then that's when I started ownership. And
how old were you at the time?
Let's see, 18, 19, 20, 23, 24.
Okay.
20, so it was 93. I got out of the military in 1993. So it's been right around there. I've been 23, 24 years old. So I was in Alameda, California, San Francisco, Oakland Bay Area. And I have no idea if it's still there or not. But at the time, and it's probably still there, it was the East Bay Vivarium, was in Berkeley, California, a suburb, basically touched Oakland. You hear about, they always have protests and stuff out there. Berkeley's always in the news for some sort of, political protest or something, which is fine, whatever. But the East Bay Vivarium was like this. It was a pet shop. It was a store, but it was like no other. When you went in there, all the people that worked there had purple spiky hair, earring piercings all over. They were that quintessential, California surfer dude, pet shop.
So you fit right in.
I did. yes.
My people.
That's right. Come together. So when you went, like in Winchester, Virginia, where I live now, if you go to a pet shop, they've got a kitten, half dead gecko, and a bunch of dog food. But when you went in those places, man, they had tarantulas and scrub pythons and mangrove snakes. I mean, not even like the normal pet shop, like a berm, or something. I mean, they had like crazy stuff, and that place was like the thing. So that's where I went for all my reptile fixes, and started getting into snakes then. And my first snake was a boa, and it just kind of went from there. And then I guess to fast forward a little bit, I met a girl, and then we moved to Florida. And that was the first time I lived in Florida, and that was Miami. Lived on Collins Boulevard, which I think is on Miami Beach. I lived in a little efficiency on Collins Boulevard.
So when you started, you got your boa. Did it immediately turn into what else am I going to get, or was it just pet boa? This is cool. I'm satisfied with this for right now.
Pet boa, I still think, because I've heard other people from my timeline say, I didn't know you could do this for a living. So I was still in that mind frame that I've got a pet snake. That's it. You know, and I skipped a little bit, but when I was a kid, my cousin, her name's Debbie, she was, I don't know, probably 10 years older than me. She had a pet boa.
Oh,
and,
really?
That's what I always used to fight my parents. Was like, cousin Debbie's got a boa. It's no big deal.
Yeah. And this was in West Virginia.
Yeah.
And so how was she? So this was in what, the 70s or early 80s, and how was she keeping it then?
She had it in an aquarium,
Sure.
she had an aquarium with a screen top. And in fact, when she went off to college, they put it in my grandfather's house for some strange reason. I don't know why, because his saying was the only good snake is a dead snake.
Oh, God.
He had this boa living in his house, and it pushed the lid off and got loose, and that was the end of the boa. I don't think it got killed, but it got gone.
It went to go live on a farm.
It was gone. But anyway, so that's what I kind of knew. I always thought that boa was super awesome.
Yeah.
So when I got into snakes, I got a boa, and it was just a Colombian boa.
Yeah.
And so I never thought, man, I need 50 of these. I never thought I needed this, back then.
Yeah.
So when I think I broke up with the girl that I moved to Miami with and went back home, which was Winchester, Virginia. That's where I joined the military, and that's where I grew up. And I came back here and started working and doing my thing. And then the internet started becoming more preprevalent. Yeah. And, and I used to get Reptile magazine and all that stuff back in the day. And you would see the ads for, Crutchfields and Bob Clark and these people. So that's when I started dawning on me this, like, wow, people do this for a living.
Yeah.
I can actually do this for a living. And, fast forward into today, I work for the government. So I would never give up my government job to do this full time because of health insurance and vacation days and all the things I have as a 50-year-old. But when I was 25, I didn't have anything. I was just doing whatever. I mean, I was a cop at times. I was a bounty hunter for a while, and then I was like, man, I can do this snake thing too.
Yeah. So you got into law enforcement in California, and then did you stay in law enforcement when you went to Miami, or did you pick up a different job?
Yeah, when I went to Miami, I was in the process of going into law enforcement, but I worked for Otis Elevators in Miami.
Okay.
And I was an elevator technician. I had electronics background from doing the aviation weapons tech stuff in the Navy. So elevators are easy. Circuit board's bad, throw it away, put a new circuit board on, hit button, elevator moves. Or some of those places in Miami that have hydraulic elevators are very interesting. When you crawl in those pits, there's some really interesting things living.
Oh, yeah, I can't imagine.
In elevator shafts. So anyway, so I started realizing that I could do this full time, and started looking, and the internet was around, and I'd get on my computer and make the fax noise while you were doing your dial-up connection to the internet. And so I started getting out there. Then I started realizing that there was a lot of reptile breeders around me. And Pete Gall is an hour and a half up the road. Brian Sharp, who's a friend of mine, was only like 45 minutes down the road.
Oh, wow.
Ian Nesdowski from Outback Reptiles. I don't know, a lot of people do know him, a lot of people don't know him, but Ian's like an importer, exporter, just wholesaler, and he does all the local shows around here are kind of sponsored by him. He's just if you need something, you go to Ian and he can get it. And so he was around here. Ralph Davis was around here. He did a lot of ball pythons. There was just a lot of breeders around here. So being a boa guy, with my boa, I was like, well, I'm going to keep doing what I've got. So I reached out to Pete Gall. At the time, he was in his basement. This is back in 94, 95. I reached out to Pete Gall. Now he's got this giant building. I mean, the building's probably 20 years old now, but when I first met Pete, he was in his basement.
Wow.
And back then, the electronics were Helix. The cages were Neodesha. Neodesha Plastics in Neodesha, Kansas. A guy named Ted, the owner of the company, was like this snake guy, or he knew snake people. And he ran a big plastics company that made jugs and just plastic stuff for the world, and then just said, well, hey, I'm a plastics guy. I can make cages too, and started making these plastic cages. The only place you really see them now is if you see a podcast or something of Bob Clark's place. Bob Clark's place is full of these old Neodesha cages. He still has a whole bunch of them.
Yeah.
And Bob Clark and Ted, the owner of that plastics company, they were good buddies, I think. But anyway, so I didn't have a ton of money, so I had a buddy, his name is Dale, and he was kind of half interested in this snake thing. He's like, what do you do with these things? Because I'm starting to accumulate them. And I'm like, you can breed them. People can do this for a living. You can 20 baby boas. I did the same thing all beginners do. I'm like 20 baby boas at $250 a piece is bam.
Yeah.
And
no other costs. None.
Zero. Now it's 20 baby boas at $250 a piece means you lost $1,000 total.
Yeah.
So anyway, but he's like, man, I'd like to get in on this. And Dale was a fireman in a jurisdiction nearby, and he had money, and he was a little older than me. And he's like, I'll give you money. Let's be partners and jump in. If you got the knowledge, I got the money. So I took on an investor, and we bought a whole basement full of Neodesha cages and started buying snakes. And boom, at that time, the company was called Rainforest Rarities. And then that company was born, and boom, we were a business. We were incorporated and off and running.
And this was in the mid 90s about?
90s. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and I had back then the Surinams and Peruvians and all that stuff were definitely around, but the money maker was albino boas.
Sure.
And then in the python realm, it was like tiger retics were the thing. They were new. Green Burmese pythons, labyrinth Burmese pythons were all new. So that's what I was buying. Those were the morphs of the time.
Yeah.
Now I don't know what albino boas even cost now, $500 or something.
Yeah.
Back then they were $7,500.
Wow.
And, so you were going to Brian Sharp's house, and Brian Sharp had the Sharp strain albino, and Pete Call had the Call strain albino.
Yeah.
And they're incompatible. So you always had to watch that and they were visually pretty different. It was, you could almost look at them and be like, well, that's Sharp's, But back in the day, the big thing was you bought a male albino and 3 female hets.
Sure.
And, that's how you could get in at the bargain price of $10,000.
Yeah.
So that's what we were kind of doing, and then all the ideas of what you could bastardize, was like, well, I could breed this to a Surinam and just think what the tail would look like and all that. Which now makes me want to throw up in my mouth. I'm like, why would anybody do that?
Yeah. I was actually just kind of prepping for this yesterday. I put in Surinam, and I'm looking through and reading about them. And I found a couple articles that were talking about, you might not have 100% imperator, and you might not have 100%, Surinam unless there's kind of lineage.
Right.
So,
yeah. I mean, I would agree with that. I think I will say that the BOA people, in my opinion, there's probably 100 people that are going to watch this who'll disagree with me, but have done a really good job with not muddying up the waters.
Yeah.
I mean, you hear the carpet guys talk about it once in a while. You got the purists, and you got the guys that want to make a cool morph. Condors are going through it now, designer, and everything's whatever. But the BOA guys, you don't see a lot of people saying, I'm going to breed my Colombian to my Surinam or whatever. It was only a thing then because of albinism. You know, because it's like, what would this brightly colored animal?
They were curious.
Yeah, sure.
And my whole thing is, if it's being disclosed, who cares? The problem is when it's not disclosed, right? And then somebody saying like, look at this crazy morph that just, happened to happen.
Right.
And meanwhile, they're like, don't look at my Surinam that I bred this to.
That's right. It's just a pet.
Yeah.
She's a virgin.
Yeah.
And so I never did do it. So it never ended up being a thing, but we just stuck with the boas because when albino came out, hypo was out, aneuphoristic was out, and it was all about ghost boas and just all that. So you had plenty to work with and stick within, Emperor. You didn't have to go over and screw up that beautiful Surinam boa.
Yeah.
You know, and now that I'm older, you know, I appreciate the snakes for what they are. You know, this room's mostly, you know, normal stuff. You know, I have some retics that are morphs, and you know, sometimes I look at them, I'm like, man, I wish I hadn't done that. I almost wish I had just bought normal retics. You know, and because you can't even buy a retic anymore without it. My retics are all something. Het for something and possible het for 30 things. You know, so I mean, you really almost can't say, you know, like back in the day, it's like I got an albino boa het for aneuphoristic, done. You know, it's het for normal. You know, I mean, so but now if I wanted to take a project and say I want to breed purple albinos, I just want to make purple albinos and refine that line. It's probably impossible to get a clutch of purple albinos. It's going to be 50% purple albino, and it's going to be the other half is going to be all of this crazy crap that no one didn't disclose is in those lines. You know, so you know, I know some of the retic people tell me I don't even list the pos hets. I don't even put it on. I just sell them, and you know, and so that kind of gets a little. I don't like that personally. You know, I want to know what I'm buying.
Sure.
But anyway.
Yeah. So how many animals did you have in that time? So it was mid-90s. You just got, you know, you had your buddy who was all the money, right? And started getting animals in cages. And where was this being done out of? Was it a separate building or a basement or?
A basement. Yeah. So the basement, I had an unfinished basement in my house. And so we did it in my house. If I had to guess now, you know, 1,000 square feet basement or something like that. And we did 2 separate rooms. One was python, one was boa, and then I had a baby room. And the guy that gave me the money also knew how to do construction stuff. So we just, there was no walls, there was anything. So we built the rooms, built the walls, painted the floors. We did everything, put the lighting in, and went to town. So the animals were Burmese, retics, emerald tree boas, and then albino, and then boas. So, you know, albino aneuphoristic, hypo, and all this stuff that was available then. And then I had 1.1 of Surinam, Peruvian, Guyana, and I had a pair of Argentines also. And I know you just got an Argentine boa, and I always laugh because, I mean, my Argentine boas, man, they were just like, they made retics and stuff look passive. You know, they just lay there with their mouth open, like, you know, it's like, Jesus, man.
It seems like there are a lot of bark and no bite. Right. I mean, you know, I was looking at, you know, I was a little concerned about that. And then, you know, and I got this girl and she's coming up on 3 years old. So that, I think that kind of juvenile feisty is already out of her. I think it was the first or second night she was here. I went in to take her out. And I mean, the guttural deep hiss and her mouth just opened up. And I'm like, that is probably the coolest thing I've seen a snake do. And she didn't look like she was going to bite. And as soon as I got her out, she was curious and wanted to look around. But I think you know, I honestly shouldn't have been messing with her, right? You know, she had to settle in and everything. I can't remember why I even took her out. There was a reason. I think I wanted to soak her because her scales were kind of curling like that, you know, and she had just come from California, and I thought, you know what, she could probably do with some humidity and just make sure she's hydrated. She just looked very dry, you know, from the transport and everything. So I think I pulled her out for that. And, you know, like I said, it was nighttime, kind of scared her. But yeah, now I'm just totally in love with her. And the kids, I have 2 boys, and they're like, she's so big, and they would love getting down on the floor with her, and she goes all over them and everything. And so you had the boas, and when did you get into Burmese?
I had jungle carpets too. I forgot about that. Burmese, so I bought everything at the same time. So, you know, you'll hear me on the Discord that we belong to talk about every once in a while. I get on to about mites and disease and stuff. And you'll hear people So when I got in, it was actually horrible, to be honest with you, because IBD was killing all the boas.
Oh, geez.
I mean, so people were selling boas that were known / unknown. I don't know if this baby has IBD, but the parents both died.
Oh, no.
Stuff like that. So, and so we were going through that whole IBD thing, and I mean, I got an education right away, especially when you're taking on a guy that's going to be like, hey, you know what you're doing. Which I didn't. I mean, I kind of did. I was an expert in snakes compared to the guy who had the money who just ran over snakes in the road.
Yeah.
But, and now all of a sudden we're talking about inclusion body disease, and it's, killing our animals, and what is this? And then, some of your viewers may end up cringing here, but the place you bought snakes back then were from like Bob Clark. If you're buying pythons and stuff, that's where you went. Bob Clark was the Walmart in the 90s for snakes. And there wasn't, the way the world is now, it's like microbreweries, and every town there's some guy breeding some snakes, and and they've got their little niche. Back then it was Bob Clark or 20 other people that would get you a wild caught something. Yeah. So, and balls were coming about. I never really cared much about those, really. I mean, cool snake, but it wasn't my thing. Yeah. But so Bob Clark, when I was buying from him, he had something going on in his Burmese where they would cough all the time. They'd cough, and they literally hacked up loogies. And you'd come down, I mean, just like, like a construction worker, the snakes were doing, and you'd come down in the morning and check your cages, and there'd be loogies all over the glass where your snakes were out crawling around hacking, and you'd be like, what the hell is that? Yeah. And so started looking into that, and he had a thing that basically was incurable, and now like IBD would kill your snakes. This thing that was going on back then didn't kill the burms. They just had like
disgusting.
Well, that too, yeah. Plus, if you got it after it dried, it was like concrete. But you knew if you saw it on your glass, what's on the rest of the cage that you're not seeing. But so we were going through this, and so I have a vet. I live close to Fairfax. I'm 60 or 70 miles outside of DC, so we have a lot of good vets here. But Scott Stahl at Pender Veterinary Clinic is like, a world-renowned reptile veterinarian. Yeah. And I've got a vet now that does dogs and cats, but they like reptiles. So when I need a stool sample checked, or if I just need something, I send it to them. But if I have a serious reptile issue, I bag it and drive into Fairfax to see Scott Stahl, at like $500 an hour. But he's awesome. I mean, he knows everything. And it was basically like, look, you're never going to cure it. It's basically a chronic respiratory infection. It'll never go away.
That's wild.
And I think it had a lot to do with inbreeding, and it just weakened them, and whatever. So sometimes you would have to treat them and knock it down a little bit. But so basically, I bought. We'd spent $30,000-$40,000 on boas, pythons. And the only thing in my whole collection that was healthy were the emeralds in the jungles in the Surinams, but all the Colombian stuff possibly could die from IBD. Some of them we even volunteered up because scientists and people were wanting to try and get to the bottom of it. So you would give them a baby or two to euthanize and test. Whoa. And it was, Pete Gall gave a ton of snakes up. I mean, I'll give it to Pete. He did jump right in and was giving up breeders and all kinds of stuff to try and get to the bottom of it. So he did, what he needed to do, probably to
people, when you were going through all that, I was in grade school, so it's like, and so when I got into it, I remember getting into the hobby and getting my first, I think my first boa was a Hog Island boa. And then I got a Colombian boa, and I had a friend that was in the hobby, and he's now in his 50s. And I remember him being like, oh man, remind me not to come over your house because IBD and this and that. And I'm sure it was probably from having similar experiences, and it's just like stuck stuck in a lot of keepers' brains that like, man, it's not worth the risk. You know, I don't want to lose my diamond pythons because I brought, you know, boas into the house.
Yeah, I mean, you almost don't even hear about it now. And, you know, I always equated IBD to like AIDS in humans. It kind of had the same, you know, effect, you know, degradation. And I'm talking AIDS from back when it started, you know, it was basically a death sentence or something back then. And now, you know, people live with it and function normally.
Yeah.
So, and IBD is kind of the same way. I mean, you really don't hear about it very often anymore.
Yeah.
But the whole thing was, you know, what just got beat into my head back then was don't have mites, you know, and you know, because mites just transmit this stuff all over.
They're
you know?
They're the vector for disease.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm like a freak about bugs, man. I mean, and I don't know if you've heard me on the forums and stuff. I mean, you know, some of the substrates we use will have bugs in them. Now, they're not snake mites, but they're just wood mites or whatever. You know, I don't deal with any of it. I want no bugs around my snakes at all.
Yeah, I mean, you know, so I'm into the whole I don't know if you'd even call it bioactive. I don't have any live plants in my cages because the snakes would just trample them the first night when they go out cruising, you know. So it's, but I do have isopods and springtails, and I like them that, you know, if a snake pees into the cocoa, like they're all over it. It's wild. Like I feel bad throwing, because I'm like getting the pee out and I'm like, or the poop, and I'm like, I'm throwing the animals that I paid for away, you know, and let me go put this in my breeding container, you know, for the isopods and everything. But yeah, the mites were ridiculous when I first tried doing the bioactive substrate. The mites were absolutely ridiculous. The wood mites. And it was concerning because you're looking at it and thinking like, are these snake mites, you know, and there's multiple different kinds, and I'm not an entomologist or anything. I have no idea what I'm looking at. But you know, as I did do what you said to do, and that was in the Retic Lounge Discord that we're both on, and shout out to them. It's a awesome Discord. 100%. And great guys, very supportive guys, you know, and that's kind of what inspired me to do this. But yeah, it's when we were talking about that, you know, you had said freeze the substrate, and I put it all in my deep freezer. And then on the day that I actually went to go make that substrate, I cut the bags and I poured a gallon of boiling water in each bag. So I kind of pasteurized it after freezing it just to make sure. And I haven't seen a single mite. And the upside to that is, you know, a lot of the bioactive community, they're like, well, you want as many living organisms as possible and this and that. But the springtails have exploded because there's no mites out competing them now. So it's now, if I dig in, it's just springtails everywhere. So that's kind of cool. So that was a good point. Like, you know, get rid of the mites, and then you're making room for the actual cleanup crew, if that's the direction you want to go with those kind of bugs.
I want to just say, I mean, I don't even think it gets bioactive. As long as it's not, you know, eating my snake.
Yeah.
You know, but you know, you go on some of these forums and people say I had mites in my cocoa chip. Whether they did or not, I don't know. You know, but I don't even mess with it anymore. I just freeze the stuff and it's all dead and gone, and we move on. And you know, you watch some. If we're going to talk about breeding a little bit, just for a second, you see some breeders, they let their cages be nasty because of the scents, the odors, and all the stuff. You know, I have a job, so number 1, 2, and 3 on my priority list is a clean snake room. If I blindfolded a person, walked them in my snake room and said, what do you smell? I want them to say nothing, you know? And then priorities 4, 5, and 6 are a little reproduction here and there. So I think you asked the other day, and I don't even think I answered you on the Discord, but it was, you're like, what's that substrate? What is, I'm too important for you.
I realize that.
I'm kidding, by the way. On the screen, I'm under idiot, so I know where I stand.
Oh shit! I forgot to swap that. All right. Thanks for reminding me. Too late, though.
I think too late. I think most people would probably agree. So you asked me what my substrate was. You're like, are those puppy pads? And they are. And, they have their own issues, puppy pads. But when it comes to cleanliness, they're second to none, in my opinion. And the snake goes, especially retics, who just dump a massive amount of fluid. The puppy pads just eat it right up. The negative part for those that don't know is feeding on puppy pads, because they get their teeth stuck on them, and your snake can potentially eat a puppy pad. But I keep all my snakes in totes, and almost all the time my snakes are in their tote. I pull the tote out, offer the food item, put the lid back on, stick it back in the cage, or just leave it on the floor with the lid on it. So I eliminate that.
So aside from, obviously you have the concern about your snake's teeth getting caught up in the puppy pads. Are there any other benefits, in your opinion, to feeding in a tote? Because I've always heard that if you feed in a tote, you're going to have less of a food response when you go into the cage, and I know it's kind of a hotly debated subject.
I mean, I haven't noticed anything, honestly. I mean, with the Boas are in this rack back here, so they're easy, but there's little totes in there. So like, this is like a tote I would use, except and you got the hole in the front, and there's a lid on it, and I do put bedding in there. So if I'm going to use cocoa chip or cypress, whatever, it goes in there. And then if they're going to shed, I spray that. And if you look at my cages, I don't know if you can tell or not, but there's not like water running down my cages. It is 64% humidity in here. And then in the cages, it's probably 75 or 80 because of the water dishes. So I humidify the whole room. But anyway, so I've never noticed anything. I mean, when I pull the tote out, the snakes they're fine, and it's the same as any other time. So, with the retics, they kind of shoot up and you touch them with a hook, and they're like, it's not feeding time, and they just go about their business. Or you stick a rat in their face and they eat. And the same thing with the boas and stuff, they're the same thing. And in all honesty, too, with the pads, I mean, if you draw the snake out, like I've got one larger retic here. She's not a monster, but 13, 14 feet. I got a roll of paper. Anybody that goes online and looks at my room, I've got a paper roll down here, and I'll roll off like 6 feet of paper, and I'll lay that in her cage before I feed her. And then I draw her out onto the paper and then feed her another eat on the paper. And that's kind of another way I mitigate the puppy pad situation.
So maybe I misunderstood. Are you feeding in the totes, or?
I do feed in the tote. Yeah. Most of the time I'll take the tote out, pop the lid off, offer the food, put the lid back on, and I feed in the tote. And then if they're coiled, you can do anything to them, once they're coiled, and I'll put the tote back in the cage and leave. But if they've done something weird where they're half out of the tote, half in, then I'll just leave them there and let them finish their meal, then put them back. Because every once in a while you get something crazy. The retics, they'll coil all the way up my tongs, and I'll have a snake on a stick, and so I'll just be like, okay, well, do your thing. I'll come back. But I've never noticed anything like that. I know people say take your snake out of the cage when you feed it, leave your snake in. I mean, I've been doing this for 25, 30 years. I've never noticed a difference. The snakes either, in my opinion, either think they're eating or they're not. It's up to you to deactivate that food response with whatever method you use. I mean, if it's my Peruvian boa coming out, you touch her with a hook, she's like, oh, okay, well.
I feed everything in their cages except for like my boas, and that's only because they're getting a larger food item,
right? And
so there's I thaw in water, so it's all juicy, and I just don't want the rat and mouse juice into my cocoa, because I use the cocoa substrate. So it's like, for me, that's really my only issue. I'm and now I used to back before I got back into keeping, everything would go into a tote on feeding day, and they'd all eat in the tote. But it was because I was instructed, and this is probably 10, 15 years ago. I was instructed that when you feed, put them in a tote. That way they don't eat your arm when you go inside the cage, and there was no tap I wasn't taught to tap train or anything like that. I didn't even have a hook. So,
right. Well, so for me, it's not actually putting them in a tote. They're already in the tote because the tote is in their cage.
Yeah.
So, like this little one I showed you, whatever, but for each snake, I got bigger totes, these bigger. So like my 13, 14-foot retic fits in this tote.
Are you using a hole saw to drill that?
Yeah, I am.
To get that hole? Yeah. What size is that? Like a 4-inch or a 5-inch?
Yeah, probably. Yeah. I mean, a 13-foot retic fits through there after she's eating a rabbit. That's all I care about. But probably a 5-inch hole.
Yeah.
But that snake's in that tote right now. Every single cage in here has a tote in it. The only thing I use hide boxes for either babies or sky hides. The hide box attached to the ceiling of the cage. Mm-hmm. And so when I've been feeding a tote, the snakes are in the tote. I just bring the tote out, pop the lid, offer the food, and put the lid back on. They're in the tote they were in 10 minutes ago. I don't have to like handle them and move them. They're already in it.
Yeah.
And that's
now, so when you guys were keeping there in the mid 90s, and you had all this pestilence and disease, and you're trying to wipe out the vectors of disease that are could potentially spread things. And I had heard that too. I had a snake probably back in December or January that got an RI. No idea why. Just all of a sudden was gasping for air, like within 48 hours. And took her to the vet, and I said, I'm kind of concerned about it spreading to my other animals, so I moved her to another room, and he had said that. He was like, well, she doesn't have mites, so just, keep her in another room and wash your hands and, all that, and start the antibiotics, and knocked it right out, and she was good to go.
Yep. And I mean, I try not to apply human emotions to my animals, but I try to use some logic, So like if you go to Walmart and you grab the shopping cart, you've essentially, who knows what is living on that shopping cart.
Yeah.
So, when I try not to let my snakes intermingle. I know people have playgrounds to get their snakes on, do playgrounds. I'm always trying to tell them, if that snake has urine on it, or, it's rubbing a certain way, its mouth comes open, and you let all your snakes play on that playground, you are introducing a certain amount of contamination to your colony, but you can't not enjoy your animal at the same time. I mean, if you want to get your snake exercise, then put it on that. I would just tell people, from a guy who's lived through disease and, spent a ton of money in vet bills and had the worry of all that stuff, make those things out of something that you can sanitize with a Clorox wipe. You make it out of PVC or something, and then when one snake's done, wipe it off. Like you do at the gym, or when you go to Walmart, they have the wipes, wipe the handle off, and so that's sanitized a little bit for the next animal.
Yeah.
And then you're good. You're good to go. It's no different than a dog kennel, and one dog comes down with something. It's not anything. Zoo. You got a lot of stuff living in close proximity, and if you're like me, your room is controlled, so the humidity's high. The things that you don't want thrive in this environment.
Yep. So do you think that that's where a lot of that came from in the 90s, the IBD and all that, was just that captive keeping was still on scale relatively new, and it was just such a high density of animals being kept in one area, being imported. So something from Australia was being exposed to a disease or a virus from, South America or Madagascar and, all these different areas.
I don't 100% know. There was probably, I watched an episode of, I don't know if it was Trap Talk or if it was NPR, and Nick Mutton was on there, and he was talking about, Narnovirus or whatever, and he was saying something to the effect of, sarongs that have been disconnected from the mainland, for 1 million years. The water and all that stuff. So when you take your Aru and breed it to your sarong, those snakes have been disconnected geographically for 1 million years. And then when you put them together, now all of a sudden you're like, why are my snakes dying? So it was kind of like he was saying, like, we as Americans, I live in Virginia, I take a trip to Mexico, and my first week on my vacation, I'm sick because of the water or because of whatever I did in Mexico, because I'm not used to it. Yeah. So when I go back to those days, there was probably a sick boa. The IBD probably lived in these snakes, whatever, I don't know, unaffected. And then when you start introducing, different things, stressors or whatever, maybe it came out. But when you're dealing with morphs, like my Surinams, I have a male for 2 females, and that's it. I have my Peruvians, I have a male for 2 females, that's it. But when you're doing morph stuff, you're putting that male everywhere you can to exploit that mutation. So back in the 90s, the most valuable snake you could own was a normal female boa constrictor, because everybody that had an albino male was trying to make hets. And, the guy in the trailer park down the road that had this boa in an aquarium, and that snake was virtually useless. When the albino boa came along, people were like, I'll give you $1,500 for that big Colombian female. I need it. And then so they were like, oh, yeah, wow. So you just ended up with all this stuff, and your albino male is literally like, breed this, breed this, breed this, breed this, breed this, and so disease just was ripe for. Same thing in the Burmese thing when from Clark, they were putting those snakes everywhere, trying to make het this, het that, het everything. The males were just, they were like Ron Jeremy, they were they were like, I need a break, man.
Yeah. So now, how did you guys? What you said that there was 2 species that were fine in your collection, right? So which ones were those again? In the mid 90s?
Jungle carpets were fine. My emeralds were fine. And then all my red tail boas were fine. And I was really worried about them because, I've got scrubs, retics, carpets. What else I got in here? Carpets. And whatever, if somebody told me you could only have 1 species, I would keep boas. I would keep a Surinam boa or something. Even though my room is mostly pythons, I like the boas the best. So I was really worried about my red tail boas. If you've got nice ones, everybody's got a Surinam, everybody's got a whatever. But to find like really nice ones and to pay for really nice ones, you don't want them to die. You don't want any of your snakes to die, but you can go get another Colombian boa female pretty easy. But it's not that easy to find quality true red tail boas.
Yeah.
But everything else was healthy. Everything else was fine. Even my boas, I didn't have a ton of issue. I had 1 die, I think, from IBD. I sent it off, and I believe it came back. It had IBD, and then I gave up some babies for testing. But other than that, I didn't lose a lot. I just had a lot of stress because these snakes are now potentially all could die.
Yeah. So what happened to the business? I mean, and were you selling to pet shops or wholesale, or like once you started producing?
Yeah, I didn't do much pet shop stuff. The only pet shop in town that's worth anything it's called Winchester Pet and Aquarium, and that guy's got some snakes. But even then, like now, I'm really anal about it. But even back then, I never liked walking into a pet shop seeing my snake in there because they kept it on like aspen bedding. It was all dried up. It was in an aquarium. It was right next to 50 mice, and the snake just had its face plastered to the glass because it's like, man, I smell dinner and I can't get to it. And I just never I couldn't bring myself to do that to the snake, So I didn't sell to pet shops a lot, but business was good back then. I mean, I had a website and was taking the pictures, posting everything up there. Things were selling. IBD was new, so it was like people were potentially reading about it, but not fully understanding it. If you did your due diligence and were sending a couple snakes in for sacrifice to the medical gods to test and everything, then you were on the up and up and doing your part. And everything was selling great back then, but it was such a different time, I mean, on the Retic Lounge, one of the questions I think they asked the last guest was, what's the difference between the old guys and the new guys? What would you change or whatever? It was just a different time, but there wasn't a billion snake breeders. I mean, I live in Winchester, Virginia, and every once in a while I'll bump into somebody and they'll be like, well, you ought to talk to so-and-so. He's got like 12 boas. I'm like, what? I didn't even know. So every town's got 10 little boutique breeders in it now.
It's wild. I mean, anything that you're interested in, I'm constantly thumbing through social media or Morph Market, and I'm like, oh, look at this guy, what an incredible animal, and then and you never heard of him until that moment. And they've got all these crazy, awesome things, or a really diverse collection.
Well, there's a guy on Instagram. I came across him, and he's got a bunch of morph boas, snow boas, all this crazy, awesome stuff. Some VPI lines, all this stuff. And it was 45 scales. I think I stumbled across him on Morph Market, and I was looking at some of his boas, and then I got looking, and he's in Warrenton, Virginia, which is like 42 minutes away. And I reached out to him. I'm like, dude, I'm in Winchester. And when we started talking, now we're friends, And I mean, this guy's probably got 40 some boas,
Wow.
And builds his own enclosures. And it's nice and clean and looks real good. He's just a good dude. I'm like, wow, I wish I'd have known you in the 90s, but he was like you, he was 12 when I was, getting into it.
Sure. Yeah.
So
I was born in 90, just so you know. I was 3.
To keep this podcast PG, I'll keep my finger below the camera. But there was not a lot of competition back then. If you were producing 25 het albino call strain albino boas and 18 Surinams and a clutch of jungle carpets that were nice and some labyrinth berms or whatever, man, you were legitimate. Not like the beginner calculation, 100 snakes at $100 is this. You were legit. I just produced $50,000 worth of snakes,
Wow.
And I mean, aside from the vet bills for IBD and the respiratory infection for the berms and stuff, snakes were on the way out. A bit of a funny story was, back then there wasn't Ship My Reptiles and all that stuff. Everything was Delta Dash. And I never used Delta Dash. I hated it because it was just a pain in the ass to go to Dulles Airport and go to Delta Dash and ship and everything. So we shipped everything through FedEx and UPS and stuff back in those days. And you didn't label your box. You just sent stuff overnight.
Yeah.
Here's the alternator. It has to get to this guy right now, really quick. And my UPS driver, his name was Ronnie. I don't remember his last name. I don't know how we even talked about it. I guess later on we discovered it, but I shipped like a 12-foot berm or something one time. And they used snake boxes. They were normal snake boxes, but they didn't have any logos or anything on the outside that say live harmless reptiles or anything. And he'd retired from UPS, and I ran into him, and he worked part-time in a hardware store. And he says, "Can I ask you a question?" I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "What did you do for a living back then?" This is like 15 years later. And I was like, "Why?" He says, "Well, you gave me a box one day." He says, "When I was driving down the road," he says, "that box was breathing." It was expanding and contracting.
Wow.
He's like, "I always suspected you were a snake breeder." Right? He said, "But that can be confirmed." And I'm like, "Well, I appreciate you still taking the box." But
yeah, I remember I had some friends back when I used to be into the hobby, and they would be like, "Yeah, the FedEx driver knows, but we don't say anything, and people kind of had their ways of shipping."
Yeah, and like I said, Delta Dash. I shipped some stuff Delta Dash, but it sucked. Going to the airport was an hour and a half. Dulles Airport. I don't know if you ever heard of it, but it's a suburb of DC. It's a crazy airport, and it just sucked. And it was $65 or $70 for Delta Dash back then, and it was just horrible. But the UPS driver would come right to your house. Here's the box. There's 6 boxes, or
Yeah.
And then we just were nervous the whole time because there is no insurance. There's no shit. If that snake dies, you're providing them a new snake. So you're just hoping, because at least if it says harmless reptiles on it, you hope somewhere somebody's taking care of it. Climatic. They're not leaving it on the runway. They're like,
Yeah.
I always thought that worked both ways. I'm like, if somebody hates snakes, they're going to be like, they're going to hate snakes. Oh, but you always just kind of hopes that the snake got there okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I always think that, because a lot of people think, snake, cold-blooded, they need to stay warm, the hotter the better. and they that's kind of, you think that's, some of them definitely going to the hub and picking up. They're like, oh, they like it, warmer, right? We put them over here. And I'm like, please don't do that. Actually, the hotter, the worse. I prefer that they get a little bit too cold. Yeah. Especially when you're in that weird in between shipping time and you're getting something in March, it's 90 during the day in March in Florida. On some days it's high 80s, low 90s, and you might be getting it from somewhere where it's 42 degrees. So there's a heat pack in there, so you want them to be in the AC and as cool as possible.
So a neat thing about Florida, I'll just throw in real quick. So I got out of the military in 93, 94, 95, 94 maybe. So about 1994-ish, when I was living in Miami. And I'm almost certain this is not a thing now. I can guarantee it. But back then, people ran businesses out of self-storage units. And that might still be a thing. I don't know. But you used to pull into a self-storage unit and 75% of them would be closed with people's bedroom equipment or bedroom, or living room furniture, and 25% of them people would be operating businesses out of. And a large number of those businesses were reptile businesses. And you used to go in these things and people would have like cattle troughs and all kinds of stuff full of Burmese pythons, iguanas, all this crap, and you could go into these places and buy snakes, in a self-storage unit back in the 90s. And,
that's crazy.
And people always talk about people turning a snake loose in the Everglades. I'm sure that happens all the time, but Hurricane Andrew, in my opinion, is what turned the snakes loose in Florida. You had Eugene Bassett back in those days, still around, I believe. But he had like a whole farm and bred, snakes in greenhouses because it's Florida and all this stuff. And when Andrew came through, all that stuff just got dispersed. And I remember going to self-storage units and looking at hundreds and hundreds of Burmese pythons, imports. They're all wild caught or hatched, farm hatched or whatever. And that used to be a thing in Florida.
Yeah, I've heard that numerous times about Hurricane Andrew, and just that was kind of the tipping point, that people had definitely let animals go leading up to that, but that was the thing that really tipped the scales and got the established population down there.
Oh yeah, man. Big time. I mean, yeah. Anyway, I kind of get off track there, but I remembered that.
Yeah. So we're still in the 90s, and you had your animals, the ones that were sick. Did you get rid of them, or did you did you just get them out of the collection, or?
Not really, no. I mean, because there wasn't nothing to get rid of. Now, it's number one who you get rid of them to, because now I believe the people that sold them to me probably knew, but now I know. So, you're like, hey, I got this hack and burn, you want to make a deal? So that really wasn't an option. So if they got so bad they died, they were gone. But, back then, and I'm probably wrong, everybody's probably got their own experiences and stuff, but like I had emerald tree boas back then. That was exotic. Yeah. I mean, everybody had their boas, their berms, and their retics, and whatever, emerald tree boas, that was cutting edge. Wow. Emerald tree boas, so, and carpet pythons, I think, were around. I don't remember those being like a huge, big deal or anything. People bought them, and they were the same price they are now. They were $450, $500, which is an awesome snake in the 90s. You're selling a snake for $500. That's freaking awesome, and like Surinam boas and stuff, the same now. They were $750 back in the, they've held their value. They're good to go. But no, I didn't get rid of them. I kept them, I raised them, I bred them, I produced babies, and just went on my merry way. Now I did outcross. I don't know if you've ever seen that picture of me on the Discord from 1995 holding that giant Burmese python.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So that snake's name was Matilda. And I got a hold of Ian from Outback, and I was like, hey, I need this giant Burmese python. Now, this is a bastardization story here, because I was going to breed a male retic to her and try and produce Borneo bat eaters. And he ends up showing up with this big puppy dog tame giant Burmese python. And instead of bastardizing it and making these morphs, I just started outcrossing the berms I had to make normals, make hets, and try and healthy up the line a little bit.
Sure.
Is what I ended up doing with her, which it worked. I think it worked because I started producing snakes. And if you had a labyrinth berm, which are still one of my favorites, I don't get to see them anymore. I'm sure they're out there, but you don't really see them much. But if I had a labyrinth berm male and I bred it to a normal, I'm trying to remember, but the hets were still like $1,250, $1,500 or something.
Wow.
Back then, so it wasn't like you were really cutting your throat, I mean, for a 25-year-old guy selling het labyrinth berms for $1,200, and if you sold 2 or 3 a month, you were like, this is awesome. I can't believe I can do this for a living,
Sure.
Back in 1990, nowadays, that just pays your road bill, but
yeah. So
no, I didn't get rid of them. I kept them.
Do you still have berms?
I don't.
No.
Nothing against them. I don't know. I only have so much room. And sometimes I look at my retics and think, what was I thinking? You know how many emeralds I could fit there, or how many Amazon tree boas I could fit there or whatever. But I do like the big snakes, but no reason in particular. I think it's just like retics is a tad better, but
yeah,
no reason. Yeah.
So what made you get out of the business?
So
and what year was it?
Yeah, I'm going to try and think now. So we started going through, and my buddy Ian, ball pythons were becoming a thing. And I mean, I remember all this stuff. I remember Bob Clark getting the first purple albino retic. I remember the first pied. That shit was all $50,000. And it was just some.
Yeah.
I mean, if I was a cop for all those years. So you think about drug dealers and all these people being sketchy. In my mind, there was no sketchier business than animal imports in the 90s. I mean, because some guy in Africa is like, I got this this snake that's white. I want 50 grand for it. And you're like, okay, I'm going to send 50 grand to this knucklehead in Africa and hope he actually sends me a live animal.
Yeah.
But that's what they did back then. Yeah, that's what they did. I mean, if you had Cameron for Bushmaster stuff, at least you had some credibility there.
Sure.
But sometimes this stuff was just this guy in some countries got this snake, I want 50 grand for it. And but anyway, ball pythons were starting to come about. I was starting to get interested because back then it was pastels. Super pastel was like the thing. People just hold up this pastel ball and be like, look at this. And be like, wow, that's awesome. And, now pastel balls are like $25 or something.
Sure.
But anyway,
even pieds. I mean, how much is a pied ball? It's
$500 or something. I think
maybe even less, like $400 or $500. And they're still cool. I still see them, and I'm like, that's a cool snake. But I remember even 10, 15 years ago being like, that's such a cool, unattainable snake.
True. And now I don't envy the new person coming into this hobby. If you want to be a breeder, if you just want to have some snakes and have a hobby or whatever, I'll get back to your question. But now there's like so much, back then I was competing against Bob Clark. Bob Clark had a labyrinth Burmese python, but he had 400 labyrinth Burmese pythons produced, and he had 2,000 hets, and he had 4,000 pos hets, but it was new. So the market was huge, and so you could still sell your snakes, it's like now, if I produce a jungle carpet python, can I sell it? Yeah, I can sell it, but everybody wants a Nick Mutton carpet python. I mean, so I'm competing against, it's like opening a hardware store next to a Walmart, it's tough. So that's where I go back to have a job and do this as a hobby. And when Nick Mutton sells out, people will start calling you.
Yeah. Like, where do you have jungles that came from Nick Mutton?
Right.
It's almost just as good.
Yeah. Well, I have carpets that came from a guy who got them from a guy who got them from Nick Mutton. Oh, okay.
Yeah. It is. That's what I said to my wife. I said, anything that I breed, they're a pet first. In our household, I'm not a breeder. Everything we have it's the health and wellness of the animal comes first, and it's enjoying the animal for what it is. I have no ambition to be any kind of a breeder, because there's people that have devoted their lives to that. And those are the ones that we rely on to produce those incredible animals.
Well, back then, you were just kind of out there, and you got a website and you advertised somewhere, and kingsnake.com. So you got a King Snake thing, and you were on King Snake, and you had ads, and you put your stuff up, and you did your thing, and boom, hey, this guy's got what I'm looking for. And your phone rang, and you sold snakes, But now it's like, heck, the snake breeding's secondary. You got to have a social media game these days. If you don't have a social media game, nobody's buying anything from you.
Sure.
But anyway, to get back to your question, so I went through the 90s, and then in the 2000s, I remember my emeralds were getting older, and I was starting to produce baby emeralds and all that stuff. And I don't even know what got me out of the reptile business, but I think I just had enough. And my wife at the time was like, you need a real job, because I was a bounty hunter, so I was going all the time, chasing dirt bags all over the country, and then I was a snake breeder, So I think at the time my wife was like, you're always gone, blah blah blah, whatever. So I became a cop. I became a deputy sheriff here in my local area, and so then I had a job, and I was like, I'm going to start phasing out of reptiles. I'm not going to do this anymore. My the debt was paid to the investor. I owed him nothing anymore. We were just doing our thing. He didn't care one way or the other. He put money in, got money out. He was good. And so I just started winding down. And I had a boa for a long time. So probably like 2015, 2016, I was pretty much out, phased out, and I had a boa. I just kept a pet.
Yeah.
And then the boa ended up dying, like 2019 or something like that. She was coiled up, came down her cage. She was dead, coiled up under her heat bulb. Like, okay.
Oh, wow.
So she was 15 years old. Not that that's old, but, she has stroke or something. I don't know. But anyway, so then I had nothing. And, you and I have talked about this a little bit. I had nothing for several years. And then 2 years ago, in the month of June, one of my children was killed in a motor vehicle accident. And, I'd always talked about snakes and stuff. My wife always knew, my current wife, who I've been married to for a long time, always knew I liked them, and was never into it. And I live on 10 acres here in Virginia, and about 3 or 4 acres I mow, and the rest of it's woods. I got a pool and landscaping and stuff, and it's nothing to be outside and be cleaning up leaves and pull a garter snake out that's been hibernating or something. And I got grandchildren. Both grandchildren are from my deceased daughter. And so we have them all the time. One of them's here today, which is why I got stuck with those bearded dragons that I can't stand. But anyway, that's a whole nother story. So I would take the snakes and try and go to my grandchildren and be like, look, this is touch it, behind or whatever, and get them to touch it. And they always thought it was really cool. Well, going through all the ebbs and flows of losing a child, my wife at some point, was like, who am I to tell you no? Yeah. You shouldn't have a snake, or you shouldn't get back in. Life's short. You should do something. So she's like, get some snakes. If you want some snakes, get back into it. Have something to do that's an outlet, And you listen to people. The only other person I can remember is MJ. I think talking about his struggles in his own life, and reptiles was an outlet. Yeah. So for me, it ended up being the same thing. So once my wife was like, I will preface this by saying I don't think she knew what kind of monster she was creating. When my wife said, get a snake or two, I was like, okay, well, hey.
Yeah.
So if she had known what was coming, she might not have said that. But anyway, she's like, do what makes you happy. And so that's what brought this back. And, this is my therapy coming down here. I work for the government, which is horrible. I mean, we won't get into that, but it's a job.
Yeah.
And then, you go through some tragedy. And then you need an outlet. And these snakes are like therapy. Coming down here, messing with these things, dealing with them, helps you. It's good for you. It's awesome.
Yeah, I've talked to you. We talked about that briefly. Just, I'm so sorry about your daughter. I can't imagine that, being a parent, it's like when I wasn't a parent, I couldn't imagine it, but it was different, and then once you are a parent, you can't imagine going through that, that kind of loss. And
yeah.
No, go ahead.
Well, this is off the topic of snakes a little bit, but I was a cop for 17 years. I was the guy that showed up at people's houses and gave them terrible news. That quintessential knock at the door and there's a cop, standing at your door or whatever. But when it happens to you, it's totally different. I'm not going to say I was prepared for it but I've lived that life. I'd seen I was in war, I was in the military, Desert Storm, all that, and I was a cop for all those years. Car accidents, overdoses, every nasty, crazy thing you could ever think of. But my wife didn't have that skill set or that life experience, so it's just been a lot. And she has her own hobbies now, things that she never tried that she's now gotten into, and then now I have this. So it makes you refocus, and it's made my wife understand, well, if you've something you love, who am I to get in the way of it? And I was cool with it. But when she said, go, if you want to get some snakes, get some snakes, it was like I had to get re-familiar with everything, because when I got out of snakes, Helix thermostats was the thermostat. Neodesha Plastics and Vision was the cages. I never liked Vision cages personally, but that was the cages. And then it was all of a sudden, well, what's everybody using now? So I'm back on YouTube with ancient information, trying to apply it to all the new stuff that's here now, and jumping back in. But I knew the basics. I mean, I would say that I still remembered how to breed boas. I still remembered how to breed retics, carpets, all that stuff. Easy peasy. But this room that I'm sitting in was just my basement. I had to build a room, buy cages, get thermostats, and arrive back here again.
Yeah, I was a bit of a mess before I got back into snakes. I was treating my health as a hobby. It was trying to optimize everything, eat the exact right things, all these protocols, and getting the right amount of sleep. And then, that for, and maybe that is a great hobby for some people. But for me, it was translating into just an obsession of, I have this feeling on my left side when I breathe in deep, and then I Google that and I start obsessing over it, or, I did this one thing with a kettlebell and now it hurts when I swallow, and it's this, pain here. And I'm talking to my doctor all the time, and it was just like consuming my life. And I was, trying to be as healthy as possible, but I was making myself as unhealthy as possible. And, I can't even remember how it happened, but one of my kids mentioned wanting a snake. I have two boys, so they're obsessed with reptiles and snakes. And, I was like, well, you know what? We'll do it right, and we'll get a ball python. We'll get just a family pet snake that's going to be one animal. That's all we're getting. We're getting one ball python. That's going to be our pet snake. And it must have been like 3 weeks later. Then it was like, well, we're going to have one ball python and one boa constrictor, and that's it. And then it just kept snowballing, and now I've got a trio of Timor pythons somehow. And
awesome.
and yeah, but I feel so much better, because it's something to, it's so therapeutic, coming into this room and spending time with the animals and all that, and it's a great way to take your mind off of other things that are going on.
Well, I'm convinced that there's two types of snake people. There's the snake people that let their snakes lay in poop for 3 weeks. And then there's the OCD snake people. There's very few in between, And when I picked up this rack unit the other day, I knew what kind of snake keeper he was when it took me 6 hours to clean it. But anyway, sometimes I'm convinced that my snakes, like screwing with me, because when I come in the morning, part of my morning protocol before I go to work is to straighten everything back up. It has to be the same, and the water bowl will be kicked over 4 inches. I'm like, oh, what are you doing? I'm like, so it does give you an outlet if you've got some energy you need to dispense, because these snakes, during the night, I got infrared cameras everywhere. I don't know if you can see any of them or any of that. There's one right there.
Okay, yeah.
I can watch in the nighttime. That's how bad. I sit in bed with the wife watching TV at nighttime, and I'm on my phone. I'm like, oh, look, the Hama hair is crawling on her bamboo. That's awesome. You're like, oh, you're sick. You're a sick bastard. And but anyway, that's the snake hobby. That's what it's all about.
Yeah. And so you kind of already alluded to this. Is it just snakes or lizards too? But I know that you got the bearded dragons that you're begrudgingly take care of.
We'll have to be careful because this is episode 1, but this some bearded dragon person could watch this and be like that. That bastard hates bearded dragons, which is a little bit true. I'm only snakes. I like lizards and stuff. It's just not my gig. Part of the reason I like snakes so much is because they're easy. They're fairly easy. Colubras can be a little more of a challenge, man. And if you get into hots, your cobras and stuff, they can be messy or whatever. But relatively speaking, out of 30 snakes or so that's in here, I'll have 2 bathroom breaks to clean up, a day, and a little feeding once a week or something. It's easy. But those things require a salad every day. I don't make a salad for me every day. I'm 6'4", 300 pounds. They eat better than I do. My doctor's like, if only you ate like the bearded dragons, you'd be healthier.
Yeah, get some crickets and salad and you're good to go.
Well, you can't see the fridge, but here's a refrigerator. And the top part of that fridge is frozen rodents, and the bottom part is salad fixings. So
wow.
I'm down here every morning at 6 o'clock, right before I leave for work, and I fix a salad and carrots and all this stuff for the bearded dragons, and I put it in there. And their cages are hot. They're lizards, so their basking spot's like 95 and whatever. And when I come home, 3 leaves of lettuce have been eaten, and the rest of it wilted into nothing. And I'm like,
yeah.
But the bearded dragons came about because of my grandchildren. So you can't just take children and just say, look, here's a retic or a boa. So they were the bridge. So I got bearded dragons to draw my grandchildren into the reptile hobby and say, look, cute little lizard, it's lettuce every single day.
Yeah.
And now they thought they were the coolest things ever. Now they're just nothing.
So when, it's funny, you talked about getting back into it 2 years ago. And I had it was a similar situation for me. I mean, when I last kept, it was basically every single snake, from the friends that I talked to in person, it was like, yeah, you keep them 90, 95 degree hot spot. And that was with under tank heat, everything that I had was in aquariums. I had one vision for my boa. So it was and I think it was like a 5x3 or something like that, 5x2.5. I can't remember but it was a bigger cage. And coming back to it, I'm like, let me look up vision cages again, and then you're like, oh man, there's a lot going on in the cage game. And then I'm reading, I start listening to the Retic Lounge, and they're saying, 88 hotspot. And I'm like, oh my God, 88, like that feels cool to the touch, because you got to figure your skin temperature is over 90 degrees.
Right.
So you touch an 88 hotspot. And you're like, the snake's going to die. It's going to get an RI and it's going to die in no time at all. So I kind of came back to it with that sort of the way that a lot of people were keeping just 10 years ago. I mean, It's so different now. Yeah. Everybody is, so much more tuned into how to keep individual species. They're not all the same. I remember the only snake that I kept different was I had a black milk snake, and it was, you can keep that one ambient temperature, because they come from the cloud, forests up in the mountains.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of what prompted this was just more discussion because I feel bad for anybody that's like just coming into it and they want to find information that's really clear and concise on a specific species, right? Because everybody's caring for species now. You don't treat every single animal the same. Even Riley told me, 87, 88 hotspot for the Papuan pythons, for the carpets. And it's taken a long time for me to accept that and say, all right, 87 is fine. That's a good basking spot for them,
Yeah.
And he uses it when he's done eating. I have like a little, I call it a sky hide, but it's a cut in half paper towel tube with some paracord going through it, and it hangs from the top of his tub lid. Mm-hmm. And, and that's just his temporary setup, but he'll eat from that upside down, which is my favorite thing to watch.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make any sense until you see their technique. And then you're like, oh, that makes sense. They hold it halfway up their body and then just get underneath it and let gravity do the work. And, it's such a cool thing to see.
That's how the scrubs do it too.
Yeah. And once he's done with that, he'll go and bask and lay on that warm spot for a little bit, but it's not even that long. It's maybe an hour or two and then he goes away.
Yeah. I tell you, from my perspective, I would have considered myself an expert in 2002 on snake breeding.
Yeah.
I was producing clutches, of all the stuff that I had, and then that time frame, which wasn't tremendous, 2016-ish, one snake left that I wasn't breeding, and then back now to 2022 or 3, jumping back in, it was almost like I didn't know anything, because it had all changed so much in that short amount of time. And I've been making adjustments here now, and when I got back on and started looking again, I pulled up Helix, and it's like, well, there really isn't a Helix anymore. It's the website's still there and almost still looks like the same website as it was in 1998. But I was just like, well, what are people using now? I'm not going to get into negativity toward companies, but the first set of thermostats I bought didn't really work out very well, so I have Herpstats now. There's one VE right there, and I've already ordered a Herpstat to replace it. I had a malfunction. I will just leave it at that. So I like Herpstats now. There's Herpstat right there. So it was almost like learning all over again, because I did the thing. So a 75-degree room, a 90-degree hotspot. You cool them down to 70 in the wintertime. This was 1990s, and then your female starts swelling. You should develop follicles. You put the males in, locks, breed babies, put them done. It was easy. I almost feel like it's gotten complicated now because, food cycling, I don't remember food cycling even being a thing in the 90s and 2000s. Or, the temperature thing never made any sense to me. So let me back up a little bit. You know how everybody on the podcast say the old guys never shared information? That's fairly accurate. I mean, Bob Park would tell me stuff and all that stuff, but the Bible was the reproductive husbandry of pythons and boas, by Richard Ross, who just died here, I think a couple months ago. That's where you went for information. They had graphs in there on rainy season, dry season, temperatures, when they found eggs. So I just bought that book and read it. I still have it today. That book, I still have the same book today. Wow. And you talk about Nick Mutton and his new book and everything. So I didn't even bother calling people and saying, Pete, how do you breed boas? I just bought a book. And back then the Barkers were putting out books. They had these little white ones. They were just black and white books, but they were loaded with information. And that's how you bred boas. So fast forward to now, and now people are keeping ambient. That was not even a thing. I know. You were a whack job in 1990. You're like, I only keep my snakes ambient. People are like, what? Somebody should shoot that guy.
I remember hearing about that, and I'm like, are you for real? Like, people are just 84 degrees, and that's it. They're just keeping it in ambient temperature. That's wild.
Yeah. I watched Cush's Corner last night, and the guy he had on there was Chambers Exotics or something from Arizona. Now, he was talking about the building he built, but it's 118 degrees outside, and his reptile building gets to 90 during the peak heat of the day. And then just for a little while, he said, and then it starts tapering back off. And he's ambient only. And I'm like, wow. my retics would be pushing the glass out of their cages if it was 90 degrees in here. They wouldn't tolerate it. But he was talking, it was successful for him. So coming back in, I almost had to relearn temperature again. And now the electronics and stuff is so good. Herp stats are so awesome. My herp stats control everything in this room, everything. So they control my humidity, they control the lighting. My bearded dragons are on UVB. They control the lights for those two guys, the heat pass. So I've finally settled on kind of a hybrid approach. So I have radiant heat panels that come on for basically like 2 hours a day. And I let them go to 90, but they only get to 90 at about the 2 hour mark when they're getting ready to turn off. Mm-hmm. And it takes a while for them to heat up and then go back down. So by the time they get to 90 and I'm shooting, they're turning off and ramping back down. And then it's ambient the rest of the day. So, but the scrubs are on ambient only. They don't even use their heat panels. Even when they eat, they don't go near them. They don't care. So, and everybody I know, Stephen Cush, who I bought almost all my scrubs from, he's an ambient guy. So,
his podcast is awesome too.
It was good. If you watch the recent one, there was a lot of good information. They were just shooting shit kind of like we're doing. And that guy just dumped a ton of good info.
Yeah. The one with Ryan Young was epic. I really liked that. I mean, hearing how, I just love hearing how other people keep, right. It's, and then, if you can get somebody that's doing it on a professional level, it's awesome. And I like all the different perspectives. It's like I love hearing that Ryan doesn't keep the same way as Nick Mutton, and they cycle differently and they do things differently, but it works for both of them.
Well, Ryan Young, when I hear him talk, I just get flashbacks to 1992 because he's like, I just have a light bulb, and if I want to adjust it, I put in a different wattage light bulb,
Yeah.
Like, wow, holy crap, that's exactly what we used to do, it was red. We used red light bulbs. And,
yeah.
I remember going down at nighttime in my snake room, and the helix would be dimming and stuff, and every light would just be kind of dimming and lit, and you'd be like, this is so cool. And now you can't see that because heat panels don't put off any light, so you don't.
Yeah.
But yeah,
so I use the deep heat projectors.
Yeah.
So it's that way, and I'm kind of I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I've got everything on a dimmer, and I just kind of set it, and so I get a peak afternoon high.
Yep.
And so it might go up to 90. 92 depending, like my carpets, it goes right up to 88, 89. And then it just starts go once my AC turns down, like once the family's back home and everybody's back at the house, the temperatures start dropping. So, that hot spot might be 83 or 84 or even maybe even lower, at night.
Right.
But, and then again, and these UVB lights, the fluorescent tubes, I think you were just talking about that on the Retic Lounge Discord, how much heat they give off in your bearded dragon enclosure. So some of these, like this is a Timor cage right here, that heat emitter is almost off. It's turned down so low because of the amount of heat that the UVB bulb creates.
Yes.
So it makes it pretty toasty in there that, when I hit that afternoon high, it's like 78 in the coolest spot. And then in the warmest spot, it's about 89. And then, everything starts coming down. So it does this up and down, which I don't know if it's right or wrong, and I do know that I've way overthought it, and that's why I loved hearing Ryan Young talk about it. And I'm like, dang, this guy, he's a pro, and he's just like, yeah, it's, you make a warm spot and that's it, Well,
here's what this is a Nick Mutton statement. I think I heard him say, it might have been like Nick and I can't remember the other guy's name on Trap Talk. But within parameters, there's no wrong way, so, back in the day, I was keeping it, the room was 75 degrees with a 90-degree hotspot, and I produced all kinds of snakes. You fast forward to today, and people are doing ambient only. And then Ryan Young switching out the 50-watt bulb for the 75-watt bulb, or whatever he's doing. And then Nick Mutton over here doing what he's doing. And then you got this guy Chambers down in Arizona who's living in the desert, and his room gets to 90 degrees during the day. And every single person's producing snakes. So that's what makes advice that people get on Facebook and stuff so tricky, because if somebody gets on there and says my snake's not shedding right, or my snake coughed, or it did whatever, and people just say increase your humidity or turn your, you got to look at there, and there's so much more to it. There's just so much more. And like for me, I don't control the cage. I used to, in the 90s, it was you control the cage. Now I control the room. So the heat's in the room, the humidity's in the room, everything's in the room. And when I want to make an adjustment to the cage, I adjust the room. And the only adjustment I make to a cage is if I have something that's pregnant or gravid, and that animal needs more basking. Then that's the beauty of a herpstat. I can go in there and, each one of these cages, that's a herpstat 4. There's 4 cages right there. So there's a probe on every cage. When I got the herpstat for that rack back there, there's 6 tubs. I bought a herpstat 6. So every tub. So if I end up with a gravid female, I can leave her hotspot on while I turn everybody else's off at night or whatever. And the control you have now is crazy, and I mean, like my room, I know this is going to wash the camera out, but the Miro's app, you're connected. I can sit at work and adjust temperatures and keep track of stuff. And I mean, it's crazy. I mean, it's so insane where we live. If people were like me and had done this back in the 90s, you'd be blown away by the technology you take for granted now.
Yeah. 10 years. It was, I remember having the ZoomEd heat pads that would stick on the bottom of the aquarium. And that's what I was using, and I'd be like, well, that's a little bit too hot. Let me unstick it and just lay it on the table underneath the tank. And, there we go. Now it's at, 90 something.
Right.
So yeah, it's wild how far it's come. And I love
the new people, and it is awesome. The Rileys, all these people it's awesome. Because back from what I remember, it wasn't like that. You called Bob Clark, you called Brian Sharp, you called Pete Call, if you, and everything else was, and there's more, I'm leaving some folks out, but if you wanted a new Surinam or something, you were probably getting an import. Which was fine, because they're hardy and they were durable and they weren't like some of your snakes. But now you got people you can go to and get your Surinam, and get a captive born one, a nice quality animal. Jeff Ronnie, that was another one. I always leave Jeff out, but I did a lot of business with Jeff Ronnie back in the day. It was just a couple handfuls. Now it's awesome, and people say that the old time breeders didn't want to give you any information. The modern time that we're in now is why, because now the competition, if you're a Bob Clark, you're sending snakes to Japan and Europe and Germany, you're sending snakes. Bob's big. He's a guy made so, but definitely back then, he knew he was creating his own competition. And now you fast forward to today, you got 500 micro breeders all over the country, and that nightmare for them is realized. So for Bob Clark, I would say it was bad, but for the hobby, we're in a much better place now. To be able to call, Riley and get a carpet python, or Nick Mutton, or some of these guys, and get an awesome snake. Somebody who actually focused on that specific aspect.
I remember one of the breeders that I would get snakes from locally back when I used to be in the hobby. If it wasn't something that she bred, then it wasn't, there was some reason I shouldn't have it. I'd be like, oh, I'm really interested in a jungle carpet. They're going to tear your face off. They don't make a good pet. You're not going to like it, this and that. What you do need is this,
Right.
What I just
You need what I have 20 of right here.
Yeah. And when I was I was probably 20 years old at the time, that was like, oh well, I guess I shouldn't get a jungle carpet because it's going to bite my face off, and I guess I shouldn't get a children's python, and I ended up just kind of forming my own opinions, and I'd go to Repticon or something like that, be walking around and be like, jungle carpet, let's do that. $200. No idea where it came from.
Right. I'm guilty of the same stuff. I mean, when you bring I'm not going to call myself an old timer, I'm 54, but when you bring that 25-year-old perspective into today, I look at Stephen Cush, because I've jumped into scrubs and I love them. And I looked at scrub pythons many, many, many times over the years, and they were just this Timors. And you say Timor, I mean, it is the same. They're going to bite, piss, and shit all over you. So you're going to be cleaning poop and pee out of your bite wounds. That's essentially what you're going to be doing. And it's like, oh, why would I even deal with that? And I could have been the scrub king. I mean, any reptile breed that's been around for any amount of time, you could buy scrub pythons for $100. Hell, people would almost pay you to take it. Please take this thing for me. I don't even know why I imported it. And you look back and you're like, man, people talk about, if I had a crystal ball, I'd like to win the lottery. I mean, if I could look back and be like, what's going to be popular in 2024? This room would be full of scrub pythons right now, from 20 years ago. And,
So what projects are you working on right now? I know you have a lot of scrubs. So what all do you have going on, and what are your plans?
So I have 6 retics, and I don't plan on breeding them. Anybody, if you're new to the reptile world and you're thinking about a retic, don't stress. There's 75,000 of them for sale on Morph Market right now. Go get you one. So I'm not jumping in that. So I've essentially got 6 pets that are going to be really large for now. And I have some mutations I'd like to throw together. I got a purple marble jag. I won't ever breed the jags. I bought them because I like them. The jags have issues. I won't reproduce those. But orange glow, super motley, purple albino, golden child. I mean, I got some stuff here that would make some cool stuff. But literally, I'm competing. I don't even know. It's 47 pages of retics. I think the last time I looked at Morph Market, I ain't even playing around with that. So 6 pets. All right. So then I got a pair of F1 bar necks from Stephen Cush. They're in these cages right here. The female's on top. She's like 10 feet. Male's on the bottom. I don't think you can see him. And he's like 5 feet. They're both. She's definitely ready to go, but he's very intimidated by her, and I don't blame him, because even when I play with her, I start sweating a little bit. Like, I hope I don't end up wearing a snake on my face. A 10-foot barneck is an animal to be respected, I promise. So, but they're ready. So that is a project. I definitely want to breed them. I got a pair of Halmahera scrub pythons from a guy named Ray. I'm going to butcher his last name. Mellies. But you remember me talking about East Bay Bavarian? Ray runs this pet shop. He's in my Facebook group and stuff in Rhode Island, and it's 401 something. I don't know if it's 401.
Oh yeah, 401 Reptiles. I got a Timor from him.
Okay, so this guy. So I was going to get back into emeralds, and I went and joined the Facebook Emerald group, and here was this one single U.S. captive born and bred emerald tree boa for sale. And I just started chatting with the guy, and it'll be Ray Mellies, whatever. And I'm like, hey, tell me about it. He's like, hey, captive born and bred, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, really cool. And we were just shooting the shit. And I'm like, well, I've been in the scrubs lately. He's like, oh, well, this is a pet shop. And he says, I have a pair of 6-foot Halmahera scrub pythons. And I was like, say what? And he's like, yeah, I'd be willing to sell those too. And I'm like, this is a pet shop. I was just blown away.
Yeah.
And I told my wife, I says, our next vacation to the north, we're cruising through Rhode Island and we're stopping at this pet shop. I got to see this place. He had Moluccans, he had Halmaheras, he had all these awesome scrubs. And I'm like, where was this pet shop at when I was a kid? This is the greatest thing ever.
I know. Wait, shout out to him. Shout out to 401 Reptiles. He's a great dude. And he had one of Ryan Young's 2022 Timor pythons, and I had bought a pair from Ryan Young of 2023s. And I saw this, I think, in a Facebook group, and I ended up picking up a third. So I've got 2 males and a female. And you know, and he even said he cares for his snakes the way like you would care for a pet. You know, he's like they're eating every week or 2 weeks, and you know, really high level of care, and there's just not enough of those shops anymore. It's so depressing, you know, and you see them come up and I root for them, and it's like, I'm probably not going to buy anything from you, but I'm rooting for you, because that was a huge part of my childhood, was these awesome little mom and pop shops with cool reptiles. And, you know, it's like, it's got so much more to it than what Petco or PetSmart has, you know?
Yeah. So 100%. I was so blown away. I thought it was a scam. I was like, there's no way in hell this guy's got a 6 foot, and they're not even 6 foot, they're 7 foot. I mean, he was, you know, it's hard to tell because I coiled up in a ball. I mean, when I got him, I put a picture up last night on the Retic Lounge of my female stretched across my 6 foot cage. And I was like, look at that, that's glorious. But I mean, a Homa hair scrub pythons, that's an awesome scrub. Yeah. That's a coveted scrub, you know, that's and I was like, there's no way. There's absolutely no way I'm getting scammed. I called Stephen Cush. I'm like, Ray Melez, Homa hair. He's like, yeah, he's got a pair. I'm like, holy shit. And I mean, I was right back on. I was like, Ray, throw the emerald in the trash. I want the scrubs right now. I mean, how much do I send you and where and all this stuff, you know? And I was even going to drive and get them. I didn't even want to put them in a box. I was going to go up there and get them. But anyway, so they came in, awesome snakes. So, and then I got a pair of Highland scrubs. I think F1s from Stephen Cush, and they're just little things. They're like this big, you know, but they're awesome. And they're hanging out looking at me right now. And so the scrubs are my project. Everything else in this room is secondary. And I'm not a breeder. I am going to tinker with them. The scrubs, you got to unlock some stuff. You know, they're not just a given. Yeah. And then that third or fourth tub right behind me, I'm pointing at with my thumb, there's a Peruvian boa in there that's going to be, she's ready. She's 5. She's only 6 feet long. I mean, she's she can eat a jumbo rat, but I may give her another year. My male's 6. I may throw them together. I mean, at her size, 12, 15 babies, maybe, if she goes and all that. The male's actually bigger than her, but the Surinams are all young. My one Surinam came from Jesse Wisdom in Indiana, and it's badass. And it came with like a 25-year lineage. Wow. With it, you know, it came with this whole crazy thing. That's a whole big story in itself, that Surinam story. And then my females are from Sonia, I think it's Circle K Reptiles or something, which I'm talking to her now on and off about some olive pythons.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, well, a couple retics got to leave before I can introduce anything else in here. But so those are my projects. My projects are scrubs. And I was cohabbing the Barnecks for a little while, but the male literally was curled up in the corner like, please don't eat me. You could tell he was extremely intimidated by the female. So I ended up separating them again. And that's where that rack came from, because I was running close on space. I'm like, let me move the boas into the rack for now. This wall that you can't see right here beside me is completely empty. So I'm just debating on what direction I want to go in the future. If I want
more cages.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. I'm actually thinking, well, there's going to be baby racks, but I'm like, I don't think I want to breed like that. I just want to do a clutch or two of something. I mean, even if a scrub python gives me a huge clutch, it's 12. Yeah. You know, it's not like a retic laying 54 eggs. So I think I'm going to do some ARS racks like 6 levels high, and then arboreal cages for emeralds. I really want some emeralds. And then I'm just going to tinker. You know, every breeding season, I'll breed a Surinam, a scrub, and a carpet, and I call it a day. And then my buddy Ian, I can wholesale anything I want to him. So if I produce 20 Surinam babies and 10 of them are smoking, I can wholesale 10 to him. He'll take them to shows and whatever, and then I can sell these for $900 a piece and just sit on them. You know. Yeah. Until somebody's willing to pay $900 for whatever. And that's what the path I think I'm going to take.
Nice. So with the Peruvians and Surinams, are you ready to jump into the care sheet?
Sure.
Get hit with the barrage of questions?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right. So
my connection's fading. Sorry. Just kidding.
I was like, no, not again. So, all right. So let's just look at this from the perspective that this is a brand new keeper. Yep. And, that this individual, their uncle had a Surinam or a Peruvian boa when they were a kid. And and they're just obsessed with that boa. That's the only snake they want. Mm-hmm. So it's not going to be in a tub. It's going to be, a show animal out in the house in a nice cage. So take that into consideration with your answers. And health and well-being is the primary focus, right. for that. So first of all, are they a display animal in your opinion, or a pet that you can interact with and sit on the couch and chill with?
Both, I think. I mean, they're beautiful, so they make great display animals. Typically, when I think of a display animal, I'm thinking of an emerald or a chondro that's basically in a cage and it's just look pretty. And they do their thing. You handle them only when you have to. But I would encourage people to probably interact with their boas because they do get big, and you don't want an 8-foot wild snake that's been living in your cage. So, but if you set their cage up correctly in your living room or whatever, they make a great display animal because they are beautiful, but you can interact with it too. And I encourage it. They like it. I don't know if they like it, but they accept it very well. I love interacting with my boas. They're number one. The retics are cool, the carpets, but the boas, man, they're cool. And they cling, it's not like my retic just wants to crawl to the ground and go eat the neighbor's dog. But my boas will hang out and chill, and they're awesome. So I would say they're both.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, sometimes I take them out and I'll go sit down on the couch while I'm watching a show, and they'll just go up my body and onto the back of the couch and just sit there and be totally content,
And like a retic, they won't poop on your couch.
Yeah, and the Timors, they definitely get a bad rap. And the one of them, I was like, I'm gonna sit down and watch TV. We're gonna watch some Yellowstone, and I'm gonna hold this Timor python, and I'm sitting there, and he's going all around, and then he just stops, and I'm like, oh, finally he's chilling out, and then just everything came out, and I'm like, I'm up and like going towards the front door, and all right, so now, what do you think, substrate or paper, when it comes to boas, and or what's your opinion? What's the benefits and the drawbacks of both of those?
If we're going off the premise that this is going to be a display animal in your living room, most people are not going to want to put paper down in their cage. Paper has some benefits, that it's sanitary. When they poop and pee, you're going to change the paper, clean the cage, put fresh paper down. And when they eat in their cage, they're not typically going to consume the 6-foot piece of paper laying on the bottom of their cage. So I would say that the majority of people that are going to go out and get a Surinam, Peruvian, Guyana, red tail boa are probably going to try and do some sort of substrate. And the environment that your snake's living in that cage is altered by the environment that cage is sitting in your house. So, pick your place in America. We'll just go with me here in Virginia. We have summer, we have winter, spring, and fall. So when the heat's on, the humidity is low. When the air conditioning's on, the heat is low, or the humidity is low. The only time our humidity is slightly high is in the spring and the fall, when the heat or the air conditioning, either one is on. And my wife usually says, the humidity's killing my hair, turn something on. And I end up turning the heat on just to suck some humidity out of the hair, or out of the hair. That's actually the right term. You see, I have that problem. The humidity wreaks havoc on my hair. Yeah. So I think when you're keeping snakes, you have to take the totality of the environment into your thought process. So I would say keep your animals on some sort of substrate that you can keep moist, not wet, moist. And so when they're shedding, you can spray it and raise the humidity in that environment and everything. The negatives to substrate is that if they pee and poop on it, are you getting it all out? Because most people spot clean. And that's one reason why I went away from coconut substrate in my retic cage, is because the turd was easy to clean up, but the gallon of urine that I couldn't see on the bottom of the cage was not great. And you would have to clean a huge area. So I stopped. And with controlling the humidity in the room, I've controlled the humidity in the cage. So I've alleviated the problem with bad sheds. You're not going to live in your house in 80% humidity, but my snake room is fine. It's for them. It's not for me. So if you're a new keeper, I'll get to the point. I would say get substrate that you can keep moist. It gives the snake, it's pretty. It looks nice in your house. It gives them humidity. You can control the humidity. The only downfall is it's a little bit dirty. You can clean it well. You just got to clean it. And if they ingest it, that's the other negative, is that they're eating their food item and a piece of cocoa chip goes in their mouth. I and you probably don't see that as a big deal. If you got a 6-foot boa and eat a piece of cocoa chip, whatever, they're going to shit a piece of bark, next week.
Sure.
But if it's a baby, you're going to want to watch that. That could be a problem.
Okay.
You shouldn't keep your baby in a 6-foot cage. You want to.
Exactly. Yeah. Ambient or gradient? What would you recommend?
So back to the premise that this is a pet in a house. I don't think you can keep ambient in your house.
Yeah.
That guy that was on Cush's Corner last night, he said that it's so hot in Arizona that his house where the people live, he keeps his AC on 80, because when you go from 118 degrees outside to 80, you feel cold. So for me here in Virginia, I keep the AC. I'm a giant fat guy. So I keep mine on 68. I like it cold. And so if I had a snake in my living room, that's not going to work. And it's hard to heat your cage. So you're basically going to have to run a hotspot all the time. That hotspot will heat some portion of that cage. So if your house is 68, that cage cool side will be 72, 74, something like that. But that snake can go over, regulate, get some basking, climb around, do its thing, and it'll be fine. I don't think you can keep ambient unless you have a snake that lives in 60 or 70 degree temperature, or unless you build a room that you can control that ambient temperature.
Exactly.
Your bogey quicker's not going to last long in your 68 air conditioned house.
Yeah, for sure. That was a dumb question. No.
If you're brand new, you don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah. And if you're jumping in and listening to podcasts and you're like, 84, gradient, how do I get that?
Well, yeah, I do want to go back a little bit, because understand that there's parameters. So, I'm an old keeper and I still obsess over temperatures. My room temperature is 84.5. What the hell the 0.5 does, I don't know, but that's in my head what I've decided to settle on. But
so you're sitting in 84.5 degrees right now?
Well, no, because I turned it all off. So it's 83.2.
Oh, okay.
Which is why my forehead's glistening so nicely. Because I'm currently sweating off the pounds.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. But understand, as a new snake keeper, there's parameters. Don't think it's that guy said 84.5. The guy under idiot said this. Understand that it's 75 is fine as long as you have a hot spot. I mean, there's all these different variables to go into this. If you live in Arizona next to the guy on Cush's Corner last night and your house is 80 degrees, you could probably get away with some ambient. You just need to provide a little hot spot for digestion. There's so many variables that go into this. But if your house is cold, provide a heat source. You gotta understand that.
All right. So this person's going to be keeping gradient. What temps are you recommending? What's the hot spot? What's the cool side? And what kind of range do you want to see there?
Well, that kind of goes into what I was just saying. So, 88 to 92 was always the old school thinking. Nowadays, everybody seems to have cooled everything down. So I'll just tell you what I do. I'm not going to tell you what you should do. So,
I just want to put in here, this is specifically for Peruvians and Surinams. And so in my head, I'm still thinking boas still need like 90 to 95 hotspot available, right?
Yeah.
Like is that still the current thought for boas, or is it cooler now? And specifically Peruvian and Suriname.
So here's one thing we need to talk about with So if you buy a Colombian boa, they're super hardy. I mean, so the one negative that people talk about when it comes to true red tails is regurgitation. These animals are slightly more touchy. They're still very hardy, and there's still imports coming in. Wild-caught Surinams and Guianas and stuff come in all the time still. So we're not in a place where our bloodlines are inbred and all this kind of crazy stuff. So they're hardy animals, but they are subject to regurgitation. I had one, I think the one that's in tub number 2 there, regurgitated 3 times on me last year in a row. And I was like, shit. And I left her alone. And started her for a month, didn't feed her for a month, and she's noticeably different size than the one in the tub above, just for 3 meals, and but anyway, and her temperatures were off. It ended up being that her temperatures were off a little bit. So when I got
too cold or
too cold.
Okay, so what were the temps?
So she was on this, you can't see it, but this cage right over here that's close to the floor and close to the door that exits the room. I guess there was a draft coming in there. I keep a male retic there now, and he doesn't mind. But that cage's hot spot was like 87, 88, and I was having trouble adjusting because if I raised the hot spot, it was throwing everything up. Just that one cage. Everything else in here was perfect. I was like, shit, I was having a tough time. And so then I finally moved her out and put her in a tub and just put her back in a Rubbermaid tub, got her away from the door, and that's what also helped her out. And now she's back, man. Small rats, boom, 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 every week, kicking butt. So understand that there's parameters, and I always tell people, look at the weather where they're from. Now, that doesn't mean that they want to be 92 degrees because it's 92 degrees in Iquitos, Peru today, because they're laying in the water or doing something, but they can handle some heat. And depending on who you talk to, the hot spots can be 88 to 95. I've heard people say those are your parameters to work within. It's so complex, but if you're going to have a 95-degree hot spot, in my opinion, you need to have a really big cage so they can get away from that hot spot when they've had enough of it, because that's a lot.
Yeah.
And I always
what do you want your cool side to be? If it like, let's say it is 95. In
a controlled environment, I'm probably going to have an 80-degree cool side. In a living room where you're running your air conditioner and stuff, and most people live in 68 to 74, I mean, my mom, I think, keeps her house at like 77 degrees but she's an old lady, and she's always cold.
Yeah.
But most people live in that 70 degree. I think you're fine. The ambient in that environment in your living room is good to go as long as you have a 90-degree hot spot. So for me, this room's 82 degrees right now. As soon as this podcast is over, I turn the heat back on, it'll be 84. Those Surinam and Peruvians behind me will be 84 degrees the rest of the day. Their hot spots are off. They get it for 2 hours in the morning, and that's it. So I turn your hot spots on if they're cold, and they never use them, by the way. I've never seen one of those snakes laying on their hot spot.
Really?
So my nighttime temperature is 77.5. My daytime temperature is 84.5, and that's gradual. I'm getting into advanced stuff, but mine starting at 7 a.m. goes up a degree every hour until it hits 84. And then at 4 o'clock, it goes down a degree until it hits 77. But for the beginner in your house, turn your air conditioning, your heat on, what's comfortable for you, and provide a 90-degree hot spot. How about that?
Yeah.
There's going to be people that watch this that will be like, he's an idiot, should be 92. He's an idiot, should be 88. Fine. It says I'm an idiot, so you're right. But
it was an accident, Kenny.
I'm just kidding. But there's parameters. If you're in those parameters, you're going to be fine. So I would caveat that by saying, watch your animal. If your animal lays under the hot spot 24/7, 365 and never goes anywhere else, then it's too cold. If your animal lays at the other end of the cage in the water bowl 24/7, 365, it's too hot. So make adjustments, a degree or two. So if your snake lays under its hot spot for a little while, then it crawls around and it lays here for a little while and it lays here you're perfect. You're in good shape.
Yeah.
The snake will tell you everything you need to know about how it's being taken care of.
Yeah. And
that's the hardest part about being a new keeper is learning behavior. It's not adjusting the thermostat, it's learning behavior. Is that snake happy? Everybody wants to know. My dog's happy, it wags its tail. It's good to go. How do you tell if a snake's happy or not?
Yeah.
And I say it's easier to tell if your snake is unhappy versus telling if it's happy. Because if its snake's happy, it's not doing anything.
Yeah.
If your snake's unhappy, it's pushing on the glass. It's stuck to one end of the cage or the other. It's doing stuff you're like, that's really weird. If you're saying to yourself, that seems weird, there's something wrong.
All right. Now, new keeper, how would you recommend they verify their temperatures? Temp gun, thermometer inside the cage on each side.
You done?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's more. I'm not just going to keep going.
There's like 60 ways to do it.
I know.
So I would say yes. Now, as a new keeper, you're not going to probably go buy a temp gun. You're not going to do this. You're not going to do that. You're not going to buy, like me. I have 10 different ways to check my temperature here. I even have VivTech things at every single cage, so I can get on the app and see the temperature in every cage or whatever. Nice. So a temp gun, I think, is the best way. And temp guns, understand that temp guns aren't scientifically proven to be accurate. They're going to be a degree or two off. So if you have a thermometer in your house, lay that thermometer on the hot spot and temp gun it and see if they match. If the hot spot on the thermometer is 90 and on your temp gun it says 92, now you've got a problem to figure out. At that point, you're still in the parameters. Let the snake tell you, if you need to go up or down at that point, because 90 or 92 is still fine. Either one of those is perfect. If the snake's there all the time, I already said this, make adjustments. But the more ways that you can verify the accuracy of your temperatures, the better off you're going to be without being psychotic about it. If your cool side is 75 and your hot side is in the low 90s, you're good.
Yeah. I use a Fluke temp gun, so I trust it. I think it's 100% on. I have a couple. I got like some cheapy ones, to have at some of the other cages that aren't in my room. But in my room I have a Fluke. Mm-hmm. And I trust that thing. Like that's the one I trust.
Right. Like my VivTech things, and shout out to VivTech, they do some awesome stuff too, but I think they're all like mildly off. Now that's not a knock on VivTech. I mean, you're paying, $20 for these things, but they tell me within the parameters that I'm worried about if my cages are good to go or not. When I look at my floor cage and it's in my room's 84 and my floor cage is 82, the next cage up is 82.5, the third cage up close to the ceiling is 83.1, and the fourth cage close to the ceiling is 84. That makes sense to me. It's cooler on the floor, it's hotter, everything. They're working fine. And well,
and also you're checking the surface temperature too. It's like if I take my my temp gun outside, the air temperature right now might be, let's say 87, 88 degrees. But if I shoot that at my driveway, and all that radiation is just coming off the sun and getting absorbed into the stone, that's going to be hot as hell. It's going to be way higher than 88, and that's in my cages. I use the DP projector, and then I use a slate placemat from Walmart. And that actually absorbs the heat. And I've noticed the snakes, like, they love getting on that. Like, they'll get on it and coil up for a little while, and then they leave and go back into their hide. And it kind of radiates down into the hide too. So I'll have that elevated, and it kind of creates a neat little a warm hide for them. And I'll provide a cool one as well.
Yep, absolutely.
And to that point, hides, how many should you have? Should you have one on hot side, cool side, in the middle? What are your thoughts on that?
So, this is a display animal in your living room and all that stuff. So if you're going to do it the way I think people that would buy a Surinam or a Peruvian would do it, I would have hides all over the place, and I would tell people the hide doesn't necessarily have to be this. Mm-hmm. If you're trying to make a pretty cage, nothing screams not pretty like a Rubbermaid tub. So a hide can be a plant, in a corner, a log, something that's not going to fall and hurt the animal if they push on it, because they will. People stack up rocks. I'm like, oh God.
And just the weight too of that.
Yeah. So I would have multiple hides, because that cage, if your hot side's 90 and your cool side's 75, the middle is 82. and that snake can then say, oh, I like it here, and they'll coil up, and if you make a hide really good, the snake will forego their temperature concerns to stay in that hide.
Yeah.
So if your hide's on the hot side, that's where the snake's going to be all the time, unless it's really hot and it forces it out. So if you only have a hide under your 90-degree hot spot, your snake's going to be 90 degrees all the time unless you provide other places for it to go and feel safe.
Yeah, and I've noticed that some of my snakes, they opt for their warm side hide, and I'm like, why don't you go use the cool one?
Right.
Go over there. Well, they're happy where they're at. That's where they want to be.
As long as the option is there, that's all that matters.
Yeah, and as long as it's not 145 degrees and it's going to give them brain damage and kill them, then they should be good to go.
They should be good to go. When you're talking about the new keeper, you're not talking about breeding, but when you start getting into breeding things, then it's like, is the heat killing the sperm and and the eggs, and you get all kinds of stuff. But as a keeper, you don't have to worry about all that stuff. You just 90-ish, whatever on the other side. I would say that the more detrimental thing is making sure you do have a cool side, making sure that cage has the ventilation. If your house is 70 degrees, you will have a cool side.
So and talking about the hot side being 88 to, low 90s and having that range there, what's your range for the cool side temperature wise? What's too cool? What's too warm on the cool side?
Personally, for me, as long as they have a hot side that's adequate, I'm not 100% sure I'm worried about the cold side being too cold.
Okay.
Within reason. That's not saying take your snake outside and keep it in your shed in January. As long as it's got a 90-degree hot spot, it won't matter that the cold side's 0. Within the confines of the climate in your house is what we're talking about. So, if you're the kind of person that likes to sleep at night at 62 degrees, you really crank the air conditioning down because you just can't sleep unless it's freezing cold. As long as that snake's got a warm side, I don't think that's going to hurt it any. I think it's great, but I don't think it's going to hurt it any. As long as they can crawl over and get warm, you're good.
Yeah.
And that cage is still not going to be, if your air conditioner is on 62 at night so you can go to sleep, I don't think your cage is going to be 62 because it's holding heat. And it's never, by the time that cage got that cold, it'd be time for the heat to come back on again anyway.
Yeah.
So I worry more about heat. In my personal opinion, unless it's horribly cold, heat kills and injures the snakes way faster than cold does. Yeah. I'm probably wrong, but for me, I like my cool side to be at least 10 degrees cooler than the hot side. So if it's a 90-degree hot spot, then the cool side should be 80 degrees or something like that. They need a gradient. It's all about providing them with the choice and the gradient to make their move. And again, watch the snake's behavior. It'll tell you what it wants. If it's laying on the cold side all the time, the cage is too hot. If it's laying on the hot side all the time, the cage is too cold. Make adjustments and then see how the behavior changes.
So you kind of brought up breeding there. Should you do seasonal temperature cycling even if you're not breeding, or do you think that there's just no point?
So I think this is another one where I'm going to go back and say, I'm not going to tell you what you should do. I'm just going to tell you what I do. So I do provide, I never changed the daytime temperature for me. And this even goes back in the old days, back in the 90s. I never changed the daytime high, because if you are going to cool, then the animal has to get warm again to keep from giving it an illness, respiratory infection or whatever. And I always kind of go back also to, what does the weather do in Surinam? Does it it's not like Virginia. There's no winter really. It's dry and wet, and there's some temperature changes and stuff involved with that. And the temperature feels different based off the amount of humidity. I don't have to tell somebody who lives in Florida about humidity.
Yeah.
So, if it's 90 degrees in Florida and it's 90 degrees in Arizona, those are two completely different feeling things. But so if we're talking about Surinams and Peruvians, I do lower the nighttime temperature, but only a little bit. For me, there's triggers. There's triggers for breeding season. And humidity. So like the humidity in this room is 65 or 70. The humidity in the cages is 75. As summer comes, I start lowering the humidity to mimic the drier season. And then as fall comes, I'll start ramping the humidity back up. But I'm trying to breed. If I was a keeper, I would never make adjustments on any of this stuff. I would do the same thing every single day for the rest of the snake's life. So if you're a keeper, don't worry about anything I'm about to say. If you're a breeder, you have to introduce triggers. And, for me, one of the triggers is lower nighttime temperatures, but only a couple degrees. I go from 77.5 to like 73 or 74. And that's just what I do. I increase the humidity. The humidity's coming back up and starting to go. Feeding, which I'm actually still learning about food cycling. That was never a thing back in the day. I'm not 100% sure I'm on board for the way some people do it, where they basically starve them through the summer and then pound them. And I don't think I like that too much. If I don't produce a baby snake because of that, I'm fine with it. I never food cycled before and produced snakes all the time.
Yeah.
So, and all I used to do back in the day was daylight cycle and temperature cycle. That was it, and everything bred.
Yeah.
Simple back then, there wasn't food cycling, humidity cycling, temperature cycling, daylight cycling. It was like, holy crap.
Now with the food cycling, that is so if you're cooling the snakes, right, then it's beneficial to not have them eating, right? So they don't have food contents in their stomach, and that could potentially, get rancid or whatever if you're cooling them. I mean, that would be probably not so much with the Surinams and Peruvians, right? They're not going to be getting temperature cycled as harshly as like a Centralian carpet would be, right? Where they're going to be going down way colder.
Well, that's why I don't adjust that much, because if you can get on my website. I do on my website, on one of my pages, I have all the weather for all the localities for the snakes I keep.
That's awesome.
If you get right on there and see what the temperature is in Surinam today, and if you click on that link thing, it takes you to the climatic page where you can see the history of the temperature and the seasons. Yeah. And I pay attention to that. I don't mimic it 100% because, but I do pay attention to that. So the temperature are slight. If it's 92 in the day and 78 at night and it's 90% humidity, those two things are virtually undistinguishable. Mm-hmm. If it's that humid and it's 77 and that humid and it's 92, it's hot and it feels like shit. And but in the winter, the humidity drops to the 70s and the temperature drops to 76. It goes down a degree or two. So temperature cycling for a Surinam, in my opinion, isn't a huge thing. They don't hibernate. They're not Argentine boas. They're not, diamond carpet pythons. So, but I do it because it's a trigger. It does tell that animal based off the humidity's changed, the temperature's changed at night, the daylight cycle's been adjusted a little bit, and food has changed. That something's up. And those are the triggers that get your snakes into a breeding mood. Okay. There's nothing like horny snakes to make a man happy.
Yeah. So when are you starting to temperature cycle? So let's say you do want to breed. Let's say, this keeper is a normal human being and they got one snake and now they have, 15 or 20, and they have breeding plans with their Peruvian or Surinam boa. At what age do you start doing that to give them, or do you do it from day one? When they're a year old, they're going to feel that temperature change come winter.
Yeah. And there are people that do that. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. So if that's your gig, rock on. Yeah. Me, I don't start temperature cycling. My snakes don't experience that lifestyle until they're big enough to move into a cage in the breeding room. Okay. If they're in a baby rack somewhere, I'm just worried about them eating their meal, not throwing up, being healthy and doing their thing. When they're in that tub and they're two years old, and I'm going to be like, this one, I'm moving into a cage. Now it's coming into the room that I cycle. And I've got some snakes in here that are going to experience cycling that are small. My two Highland scrub pythons are not even a year old yet, and they're going to be in here and go through it. So, but I don't have a ton of babies in a baby room. This is it. So I'm probably one of those people that end up cycling to some degree babies when I produce some.
Sure.
But they'll have heat under them. They'll be able to crawl over the back and get on their heat. If you're somebody who's going to breed Surinam boa constrictors in your living room, that's going to be tricky. It's not impossible, but so you're, in my estimation, your cool side's already cold. You don't want to go any colder than that. If your house is air conditioned to the low 70s, that's as cold as you want that to go. So your adjustment of temperature cycling, if you're going to choose to do that, it's going to be off your hot spot, whatever that is, and you're going to be changing that at nighttime. If you're in your living room, I'm assuming you have windows in your living room, so your daylight cycles are going to be wherever you live, because it's going to get dark outside. And the only light the snake's going to be getting is from your couch light and your TV. So that's all tricky stuff. In this room, I control everything. It gets dark when I tell it to. It gets light when I tell it to. I control it all. So in your living room, that's all going to be a little bit of a thing. Now, there's probably plenty of people out there that say, man, I bought these Doomeril boa babies from this chick that had these things in her living room, and they live together, and every year they produce a clutch of babies. Okay. Yeah. Good for, cool. So yes, it can happen, but there's going to be a little luck involved. If you end up with a gravid snake, buy a lottery ticket. You were lucky. But
all right. So we already covered night drops. Just kind of naturally you're going to have that. In my house, our thermostat for the house is set up to go up to 78 at 5 a.m. Yeah. So because we leave and we're in Florida. So if I leave it at 72, it's going to be that AC is just going to run 24/7. Right. So it goes up to 78, and that's how I get that rise in temperature. And then when my wife gets home, it drops down to 74, and then once the kids go to bed, 72, and then once I'm in bed, it's at 71, and then until 5 a.m. So we kind of have a natural. Up and down.
Your snake room does that too. Same thing.
It's all central AC. I don't have a mini split or anything like that. So it's all going off that. With that being said, with all the lights that are in here, and all the heating elements, this room is just warmer. There's no way around that. It's probably, it probably tops out at like 80, during the day.
Well, on that topic, I'll say this. This is, again, another Nick Mutton, Ryan Young, I think. It's definitely Nick Mutton conversation. One thing that they said in there will resonate with everybody, no matter who you are. Pick something and stick with it.
Yeah.
So if you choose to keep your room at 80 degrees and your hotspot at 90, choose it and stay with it. Yeah. And then make adjustments from that. If you choose to not have a hotspot and do ambient, fine, but do it and stick with it. This is directly from, I think, Nick Mutton's lips. If you constantly watch a podcast and make adjustments off what the idiot on the screen said, your snakes are going to be in constant flux. Yeah. And they're never going to know when that trigger happened, because it triggers off every podcast that you watch. So find what works for you and your environment is easy to obtain. If you're in your living room and your air conditioning's on 72 and your hotspot's on 90, you can maintain that. Live with it. Do fine. Now your adjustment, if you're going to do temperature cycling, is going to be off what you do at that hotspot during that breeding time, lowering it down, whatever. So find what works for you. Don't worry about what I do here in a controlled environment in Virginia. Find what works for you within those parameters that we've talked about, and then stick with it and make adjustments from that. Don't worry about what every single person on the internet is doing. Take all that information, find what works for you, and do it, and stick with it. Don't change it every time you watch a podcast.
Oh man, I the Facebook groups can be a blessing and a curse, but I remember I had a Doomeril's boa that wasn't eating. A baby just would not eat all winter long, wouldn't take anything. And, the people that are on the groups, you go there for some information and some help, and, oh, well, what's your hotspot? 88. Oh, it should be 87.5. That's why it's not eating. It's too hot, and so it can be detrimental, just taking in too much information and just getting too much input,
Well, the thing I try and tell people about reptiles, I mean, everybody's had a dog and a cat. People are used to that. Even if you didn't own one as a kid, everybody's seen a dog and a cat, whatever. They live like you do. Your house is, they're cool, whatever. Snakes are easy and hard at the same time, and they're only hard because it's foreign to you and you're learning. It's a whole new thing to learn, and you're worried if you don't learn fast enough, this animal's health is going to be affected by your lack of knowledge. You can mitigate that by doing your homework before you get the animal, and a lot of this you won't have to worry about. Get your cage, get it set up, and play with your temperatures for 30 days, and shoot the hot spots, and do your thing, and make your adjustments, and say, I think this is running right, and then go buy a snake. Then you take most of the stress out of it, because you're like, I think I'm doing okay here.
Yeah.
But the part about it is they're tremendously forgiving animals to some degree. I mean, they've been around for millions of years, and they've survived all kinds of crap. So they'll tolerate your bit of ignorance for a while. As long as you're not keeping it at 65 degrees for a couple of weeks, it's not going to get an RI because it was 65 degrees for one night. It'll be all right. So just as a new snake keeper, don't stress yourself to death. Understand the parameters and work from those and make slight adjustments and pay attention to your snake's behavior. You'll be fine.
Yeah. So would you recommend, you personally, I mean, I think we've already covered this, but, timers, dimmers, thermostats, herpstats, all these different things. It seems like, we've already kind of covered that. You have your radiant heat panel that turns on, but for the person that's maybe they're keeping just one Peruvian or Surinam out in their living room, what would you recommend for them? A heat bulb, a heat emitter, radiant heat panel?
Radiant heat panels are the easiest. I like radiant heat panels, depending on the cage you get and all that. Because if you're going to do something that the snake can touch and climb on, that's bad. And back in the 90s, that's what we did. We stuck a red light bulb in the cage, and you come in at night and you see the kind of snake kind of crawling around it a little bit. And you'd be like, hey. But mine never got burned. It only did it at night. In the day, they just did their thing. But at night, the temperature of the bulb had always gone down. But now they make cages to go around them and all that kind of stuff. Radiant heat panels are just nice. I personally like belly heat for boas. It's not essential. So if you're the new keeper out there watching this, don't stress over that. Radiant heat panels are fine. I like belly heat for the boas. They seem like they just kind of like it. It works well. But it is harder to manage, in my opinion, because your probe has to be by that pad. With the radiant heat panel being stuck to your ceiling, the chances of that snake pooping and peeing on it, causing a mess with it, is a lot less reduced. So I would say get a radiant heat panel and get a thermostat. I'm just going to look at the camera. If you're spending $700 or $800 on a Surinam boa, do not buy a thermostat. Buy a thermostat. It's part of the deal. You must have one, period. I don't care if you're going to put it on a rheostat, if you're some fancy electrical whiz and, your cat's going to rub against it and you're going to cook your snake. Buy a thermostat. And, if you're on a budget, you're probably not buying a Surinam anyway, but if you're on a tight budget, you can get an Inkbird. I mean, they're $20 on Amazon. As long as that heat is controlled, because those heat panels, I lost 3 snakes due to a thermostat failure. It was made by the company, that thermostat right there. And I lost 3 snakes and when I finally discovered it and shot the heat panel with my temp gun, they were like 158 degrees. So even if you're not worried about the death of your snake, worry about burning your house down. Worry about the plastic cages warping that you spent all the money on, whatever. You must buy a thermostat. You must. You have to do it.
Yeah, I've got a couple of the Inkbirds. They're not too bad. So
the thermostats control so much too. If you've got a light in there, a herpstat too will control your light and your temperature. And you can set it all up and it'll do its thing. And if you're going to breed, I recommend putting a light in the cage. That way you can at least control the light cycle in that cage.
What's a good humidity for Peruvians and Surinams?
All right, so a lot. They're from the tropical rainforest, so they get rained on every single day for several hours, and it's very, very, very humid. Now, with that said, as a new keeper, you're going to be sitting there saying, "How do I do this in my house?" You don't necessarily have to. they're tolerant. All right, so there's times where humidity matters more than others. Obviously, that's during the shed cycle. During the shed cycle, humidity is important, but you can mitigate that with spraying, and all that, and get the humidity up during that, 10 to 14 day period or whatever. But humidity is important, and if you keep it dry, your snake will not thrive. This particular snake will not thrive. You definitely want to have humidity and the ability to create humidity. In my room, the floors are concrete, and on the rare occasion that the humidifier shuts off, and I come in here and it's only like 40% humidity or something, I just spray water on the floor, and the humidity shoots up to like 70 degrees, 70% like instantly, because the floor is soaking wet with water, and I don't have to worry about it. It's concrete. I don't care. And so I get it back up. But humidity is important when it comes to any tropical species. If you live in the desert, buy a sand boa,
so basically keep substrate, if it's this one animal, your substrate's going to be more aesthetically pleasing. And then you've got the humidity aspect taken care of as well. So you can mist and it'll retain that humidity, if it's in your living room, right? So, it's not as easy to control it in the room.
Right. And these PVC cages hold humidity really, really well. They do. If you're keeping cocoa chip, and you'll discover as you're evolving through your new snake ownership, that if the substrate's too wet, whether it's cocoa chip or not, it'll mold. Things will happen to it or whatever. So then you just make adjustments. You're like, okay, this stuff's mold and it's too wet, because you're in a warm environment with a lot of moisture. So then you just start cutting it back. We talked earlier about temperature guns and all that stuff. Get a hygrometer, get a gauge in there that tells you the humidity. They make analog ones. That are $10. Give you a rough estimate. I mean, if it's 62% humidity or 72% humidity, you're good.
Yeah.
And the cage will hold the humidity, but when your air conditioner's running, you're drawing the moisture out of your house. When your heat's running, you're drawing the humidity, you're burning it up. So you have to supplement that for your reptile. If you don't, they'll have bad sheds. They'll be dry all the time. It'll be bad.
That was a good point you made before too, about setting up the cage 30 days before you even get the animal, because, and you can dial in your temperature and everything. But when you just mentioned mold, when I switched over to this cocoa, chunk block, whatever you want to call it, that I'm using right now, in that first week, there was a boom of mold, where all of a sudden, and it wasn't all over the place, but if I was using cork bark, it would be along where the cork is setting on it, underneath the water bowl, this kind of white fuzz appeared, and then it all just disappeared, within a week. So if you're setting up 30 days in advance, you're going to get that mold boom over with, as long as there's good ventilation and you're not keeping it wet,
Well, the issue with cocoa chip, especially if you're a new keeper, once you've been messing with cocoa chip for a long time, you learn how to deal with it. But as you're essentially soaking it in water to get it to bust apart and be so you can actually use it. So it's wet from the get-go.
Yeah.
And when you put it in a cage with an 80-degree room with a 90-degree hotspot and some lights and all that, it's just like, it's like a mushroom factory. It's like, get the snakes out of here. I'm growing mushrooms.
Yeah.
So then I started keeping it in a really big Rubbermaid tub. I would soak it, get it all busted up, and I'd throw it in a Rubbermaid tub for later use, and it would air and dry a little bit.
Yeah.
So that's the one thing I liked about it, or that's one thing you have to learn to adapt to, is maybe making it ahead of time. Cocoa chip, it's not perfect, but it's really good.
Yeah.
It is really, really good. And if you're trying to make a naturalistic setup, it's probably one of the best choices going. You just have to learn how to deal with it, because you don't want to introduce mold into your house, and your snake doesn't live in the mold either.
Yeah. How often do you change water?
I change it quite a bit for some. I mean, the textbook answer is I change my water every 2 days, and my snakes have lovely. And it's actually, I have rivers flowing through my cages.
Yeah, nice little stream.
I mean, with the retics, it's easy because they crap in the water all the time. So they pretty let you know, here's what I think of this water.
Yeah.
But I change my water like once a week, every weekend. I telework a lot. So on Wednesdays, I'll telework, or I'll be home, and I'll change the waters. But I have double tubs. Everything I've got, I have in triplicate. So it's not like I have to go and wash the bowl. I just take the dirty tub, chuck it in. I got a big deep sink outside the room here, and I just take a new tub and stick it in. So it's easy. And then over the weekend, I just wash all the dirty stuff.
So new keeper, change your water once a week. Pick a day, and that's your day that you change the water.
Yeah, I mean, if you only got one snake, change the water every day. You know, what the hell you got to lose? You know? When you get 50, you can be like me and do it every once a week. But yeah, once a week's fine. As long as they got fresh, clean water and they haven't messed in it, you know.
Yeah,
I think that's good. I'll hear people on these podcasts, and I'm not saying they're lying. I don't know, but they'll be like, I change my water every 3 days. I'm like, sure you do. You got 500 snakes. I bet you. Oh, good.
Yeah. So what are you using to sanitize your water bowls?
I have soap and water.
Just soap and water?
I have soap and water. I know people got all this stuff. I mean, I'm a human, and I have dirty dishes, and I use Dawn dishwashing detergent and water to clean my dishes. And so I don't do anything for the snakes that I don't. So if Dawn works for me, I figure it works for them. As long as you're cleaning it and it's air drying, you're good to go.
Yeah. All right.
Unless the water bowl made out of wood. If you got a wood water bowl, you might have issues or something. But if my water bowls are all plastic and stainless steel.
Yeah.
You know, if you've got a disease or an outbreak, you might want to Clorox them or something. But
yeah. Do you recommend giving a water bowl large enough for the animal to soak in?
I do.
Okay.
I do. But it's not essential. I don't want people to think they have to put a pond in their snake cage.
Yeah.
But
it's hard with a snake like this, with that size, Surinam or Peruvian.
Once they get really big, it is hard. Unless you build it. I mean, if this is a pet, you know, and you're really into it, you know, build it an 8-foot cage and put a tub of water in there. You know, they'll get in. And my retics, they soak all the time, and my boas soak all the time too. My scrubs never soak. And I asked Steven about that, and he's like, the only time I ever see scrubs soak is when they have mites. Other than that, they never use it. So my scrub pythons have a little teeny water bowl in the cage. I don't know. And I don't know if you can see over there or not, but that's the water bowl. So that scrub's got a big tub. Yeah. I've never seen them anywhere in there. In fact, they're all the way at the other end of the cage. But those snakes do, like tropical species, they will get in their water, they will soak. They don't do it all the time, but they do utilize it. But don't stress over it. You know, if you can't do it, it doesn't mean you're not taking care of your snake.
What about soaking in a tote outside the cage?
I think that's beneficial. I don't have a problem with that as long as you're not interjecting your human thought thinking. I think my snake wants to soak today. So if your snake's going in the shed or something and you've been worried, then maybe give it a soak. But remember when you were a kid, your mom told you to take a bath and you were mad? Your snakes want to soak when they want to soak. They don't want to soak when you think it's time to soak. Give them a choice.
All right.
If it's in shed or something, there's nothing wrong with throwing it in the water and giving it a soak.
Yeah, and like I definitely don't do it because it would be so time consuming, because I'd have to get fresh water and I would want the temperature to be, you know, probably like 84. That way it's nice middle of the road. It's too much. But I do it, you know, if I have a bit of retained shed or something like that, or, you know, but then also I'm going to be looking at what caused this issue too. You know, what did I miss along the
So you don't have to do it again. Right. You know, and as a hobby breeder, I try and provide the animals with everything they need in their cage, so I don't have to intervene. You know, I like them to shed because the humidity is right in their cage and all that stuff. As a keeper, as a beginner keeper, you're really going to want that, because a stuck eye cap's going to freak you out.
Yeah.
So you have to mess with this snake's eye and get an eye cap off of it. You know what? So if you mitigate those items by taking proper care of your enclosure, you won't have to worry about all those other things being issues on the backside.
Yeah. Now, and so what if you just, let's say you got this Peruvian or Surinam boa, and it came in, like my BCO came from California. Would you recommend soaking after shipping, or?
I do. Yeah.
Just to hydrate.
I do, yeah, because they hydrate. The snake's already stressed. It's already been a shipping box. It's already been Ace Ventura all over the airport, and all kinds of crazy stuff. So when you get it, throw it in some water, let it soak, do your thing. If it's your only snake, it's your only pet snake, you don't really have to worry about quarantine so much. And then get it in its enclosure, and then leave it alone for a couple of weeks, and for God's sakes, don't call the breeder 2 days later and say it didn't eat, just give it some time, let it just chill and relax.
I will say, so I don't say it didn't eat. I say, how do you recommend I feed them? When should I feed them? What's your opinion? And that's, again, kind of just me being curious and enjoying getting different perspectives from different breeders. Some say feed them the same day, and others say, oh, let them have a week, let them acclimate to the temperatures and this and that, and so, yeah, that's different perspectives.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I always tell people, watch the snake. The snake will tell you, what it wants to do. If the snake looks like it's chilling and it looks comfortable, feed it. If the snake's still like moving around its cage and it's hiding in this weird way or something, which I know is hard to figure out if you're new, then it's still stressed. Don't leave it alone until it looks like it's relaxed in its environment. But I've fed snakes the same day. I mean, I got retics. I didn't pull a retic out of the bag, but here's a mouse. Ooh, look at that! And threw it in its cage. So we've all done it. Well, I guess my point would be is if it doesn't do it, then leave it alone and give it a couple weeks. The miraculous thing about Boas is people can talk about retics, burns, all this stuff all they want to, and feed response and all that stuff. I've been there, done that with all of them. Boas are some of the most reliable feeders that there are. Yeah. I mean, my retics even get a little finicky if they're in shed or something, or going in there, they'll kill it and leave it lay. My Boas eat every single time.
I know.
Without fail.
Whether they're totally opaque and in the middle of a shed or whatever it is, and I need to move them while they're wrapped, you pick them up and put them down somewhere else, and they just they don't care. I've missed it around one of my Boas while she was eating.
Yeah.
And she's just staring at me like, thanks, Dad. Appreciate the humidity.
Yeah. I needed a drink with dinner.
If it was one of my Timor pythons, if I walk through the door while they're eating, they'll start backing off. And I'm like, oh, geez, because it's just a different animal, Yeah.
I mean, and you may get to this as a question, so I don't want to jump ahead. I don't know the questions, but boa constrictors are not retics. Be patient with your feeding. And I know there was a Discord member the other day that was just talking about she didn't know if she was feeding too often or not enough. There's a little bit of stress or whatever. Snakes are built for food, disparities. I mean, if you're feeding your snake every Saturday, fine. If you're feeding your snake and you didn't get to it, you weren't home on Saturday, you didn't get to it till Wednesday, fine. Don't stress over that. Just, but you cannot power feed Boas. It's not a retic. You can't give it a rabbit every day, and it doesn't take it. There becomes a time, and there's a lot of really good information. If with this podcast, I would encourage you to try and get Jason from Jason's Exotics on. I mean, that dude's a wealth of information. His website's kicking when it comes to Boas. Yeah. But once a true red-tailed boa gets to like 3 feet, they're rock solid, man. Then you can start kind of hitting them a little bit. And they'll grow. And back in the 90s, the big thing was pinheaded. If you fed your boa, the body would be this big and the head would still be like this big. Yeah. You didn't want that, so you want to take your time with them.
We're definitely going to get into feeding because that's basically a whole card here.
Okay.
So we already covered day-night cycle. It's important, right? They need to have a sunrise, sunset for their circadian rhythm and all that. It seems like if you are Count Dracula and your living room doesn't get any sunlight, you always keep the blinds closed and things like that, you're going to need some supplemental light in there, right?
Yeah, well, some light. Yeah, you're gonna need light. I mean, snakes are nocturnal, so their time is nighttime. You don't want it to be nighttime all the time.
Yeah.
They do need light. And if you're buying a cage, a thermostat, a snake, substrate, all that stuff, you've spent $1,200. I mean, depending on what kind of cage you bought, you spent $2,400. But to buy a light for the cage is $25 more. Yeah. So if you're the kind of person that likes to live in the dark, buy a light for your snake.
What about UVB? for if it's and keep in mind this is a pet, so it's not large scale. It's not 500 animals, because I understand that's not reasonable. I keep UVB. I don't know if there's any real evidence that it's super beneficial. I've heard that maybe it aids in immune function and things like that, but what's your thoughts on it?
So my thoughts on it is, I'm probably going to revert back to old school a little bit here, but I don't think there's anything wrong with it. So if you're going to do it, you're not hurting anything.
Yeah.
So I don't think I have a negative that you're going to be paying $20 every time your light bulb burns out. But hey, but so are there any negatives to it? I don't think so. So you're not hurting anything. My mind works like it's a nocturnal animal. It's typically hiding somewhere all day, and it comes from the rainforest where almost no light gets to the jungle floor anyway. Now, boas are boreal to some degree. They'll climb trees and catch a ray of sunlight somewhere. I don't do it. I don't think it does anything for them. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. If you're going to set up a naturalistic enclosure, it's definitely going to help your plants and stuff. Sure. And there may be, and I'm coming from this from an old school perspective probably, but if the animal's nocturnal, it's not getting any daylight anyway most of the time.
Yeah.
So I don't see where it's. And I've been keeping boas. I mean, I'm just back into it now for a couple of years, but I don't know, 15 years on and off. And I had a boa. They've never had it. I've never seen them have any reason to believe that if I just had UVB, they would be better.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you're not going to hurt it. So knock the socks off.
All right. So let's start getting into enclosure size here. What's the ideal size for an average adult?
So I keep, in the old days and now, of course, they're in tubs right now, but they're all kind of young. They're fairly small. They're not going to live there forever. So if a day comes where I get rid of the retics, I'll be moving my boas into these 8-foot cages, which is overkill in my opinion. A boa can live really good in a 6-foot cage. There are outliers. We've all seen the old pictures of the 14-foot Surinam. And Argentine boas can get quite large. So if it's a pet and it's in your living room and you're doing the best job you can do for your snake, an 8-foot cage, it'll live its whole life very happily. Yeah. A 6-foot cage is plenty though. Especially if you're getting the animal out. If it's a pet, you're going to be taking it out and playing with it. So the cage is more of a housing unit till the next time you play with it. 6 foot's great. And my cages, the boas we're in, are 6 by 30 by 18.
Okay.
And that's a quasi breeder perspective. I would go taller if it's a pet and put a branch in there because they'll climb.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So small end of the spectrum, 6 foot. If it's your only snake, maybe go for an 8-foot enclosure.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got the room, they'll use it. I mean, if you build a cage if you had a wall and you built a cage that was 10 feet long, 8 feet tall, and 4 feet deep, you'd see that snake all over it. Boas will use it in time and do all kinds of stuff. But if you've got size limitations and you can do a 6 by 30 by 24 or something, great, man. They'll be happy.
Yeah.
And these right here, these are 24-inch tall cages. I got scrubs in. You can see the bamboo stick. Yeah. So they've got room to climb. They climb up and down that bamboo, and they do all kinds of stuff in that 24-inch tall cage, and they're happy.
Nice.
And scrubs are highly arboreal. They don't hardly ever touch the ground, and they still do good in there.
Nice. Yeah, I'm getting a 6 by 2 by 2. I'm going to pick it up weekend after next for my BCO to move into, but she's only 3, so she's not that big.
No, but she'll do great in it. I mean, I was telling somebody the other day on the forum that I put baby retics in 8-foot cages when I got them. I didn't have any racks at the time, but you provide them with hiding spots. They don't care. I mean, I always tell people these snakes were in the wild. I mean, if you don't think they can handle being in an 8-foot cage, how'd they handle crawling around Surinam? They didn't hide somewhere and say, "Oh my God, this big." They as long as they've got places to hide and all that stuff, they'll do just fine.
All right. So when somebody's first getting their baby boa, you recommend a smaller cage or just go straight for that bigger cage? Or
I think you can go straight to the bigger cage, but I wouldn't recommend it. I do think there's an an escalation in size, so I would say buy the cage that's appropriately sized for your snake and grow into it. If you're on some crazy budget and you're like, I just got to do this one time, your wife says one time you can use the credit card, then you might want to use the credit card to buy the big cage so you don't have to worry about it later. But I always tell people you can always go ahead and buy the cage and then keep the tub inside the cage,
Sure.
if you don't have another place to keep your tub. But I recommend starting out small and working up.
Sure. All right. Now, that first year of life, how often do you think somebody should feed?
Mine when they're the first year when they're newborns, I go once a week. Even if I'm selling them, I don't cut their feedback once a week. And I think it's important. If you're watching podcasts and somebody's saying I fed my 6-foot retic a 300-pound pig, it's important to know that that's not a Surinam boa constrictor. Don't take your 2-foot-long Surinam and feed it a jumbo rat and be like, look at the lump, and put it all over Facebook. You'll get crushed. That's
what social media is for.
For crushing. It works. It's very effective. Girth-based prey, so with boas, especially the first year or two, I say feed them something that either just barely makes a lump or makes almost no lump at all. For true red tails, for Colombians, you push that a little bit. They're a little more durable, or you'll end up with a regurg. And once you start that, it's hard to come back from it sometimes.
Yeah.
So take it easy with them. They're delicate as far as feeding. If they're a newborn, they can eat a mouse.
Yeah.
You'll be on a mouse for the first 8 months, until you go to a larger mouse and whatever. When they get to be 3 feet long, then you can start kind of pushing the limit a little bit with red tail boas.
So we're still at the first year. So once they get past that and they're in that 1 to 2 range, how often are you feeding then?
1 to 2. I'm depending on the snakes. My 2 Surinams over here, they're 2.5. And I give them small rats, body of that size and yay big around, and they've digested it. It's gone. I'm still at like 7 to 10 days with them, but it's body composition. If you start seeing them getting fat or their girth or their waist starts being inconsistent with the size of their head, then you make some adjustments. But they're still good, especially if your temperatures are right. If your temperatures are low, you're going to see that the snake's not hungry or not ready. But if your temperatures are right, the snake will be hungry again by then. And then it's not till about year 3 or so that I start going like 14 days and stuff like that.
Okay. All right. So 3 to 5 years, once every 2 weeks about. And then what about beyond that? Once they've kind of hit their potential, if they're 7 to 10 years old?
It's at that point it's purely body composition for me. So like my 5-year-old Peruvian, a jumbo rat, she doesn't even look for food for 3 or 4 weeks. If I offered, she'd certainly take it, but she's plump and looks really robust. But she's 3 weeks and she's 5. Now, if you've got one of those monsters, you got a nice 7-foot boa and it's yay big around or whatever. If you feed that snake all the time, it's going to get really, really fat. So as long as it's laying around doing its thing, but if you go down there at night, that snake's kind of pushing its cage a little bit, roaming around, feed it. It's time to feed it.
I think one of the biggest things is none of these are hard and fast rules. It depends on the animal.
Right, it does.
Right.
Yeah.
I sent you a couple weeks ago. I had sent you pictures of my BCI girl, and she got round out of nowhere. She got round, and that was eating every 7 to 10 days. The same size food item, and all of a sudden she just got thick. And I pushed it out to every 2 weeks, and now she looks perfect. Her body composition is great. And then I have my IMG male, and he eats every 7 days, and by that 7th day he's looking for food and his skin is like hanging off him. Not literally, but totally different. The metabolism is just different, and
it is different. And there's different times. If you got kids, and they were in the 4th grade and you bought them clothes that fit when the school started, and 3 months through the school season, their pants are, put up, they had a spurt and they're eating and you've got 2 boys, you'll figure that out. When they get to your grocery bill is $700, you're like, you little bastards.
It's already ridiculous.
So, the snakes are the same way. They might go through spells where they're a little hungry or a little hungry, but just manage it. You know, your dog's the same way. I got one really fat dog, and the vet's like, cut it back. You know, you got to cut it back. So,
Yeah, I have a yellow lab, and it's, we keep him on a pretty strict diet, but he gets a lot of exercise and everything. Yeah. He walks so much that I don't have to cut his nails, you know. So we do a lot of walking, and it just keeps him super fit, you know.
Yeah.
And
I always tell people, look at your animal. It'll tell you everything you need to know. Now, if you're a super new keeper, you might not know what a fat snake looks like, you know.
Yeah.
But you know, if you are on podcasts, you look at other people's pictures, you'll figure it out.
Yeah. Now, Peruvians and Surinams, do they have the same kind of body structure as a BCI? That's sort of where the sides are kind of flat, you know, and the the top more.
Unless you've ever
Yeah. So maybe that's a good thing for a new keeper to look out for if they, because everybody that gets into it, you're sitting there. If you're listening to a podcast or you watch a video, you're thinking, well, am I feeding too much? What am I looking for? You know, so if it's that, when it comes to body composition, they shouldn't be round, right? A Suriname or Peruvian should not be round.
I mean, we've all seen python videos. You know, you get Burmese pythons almost look like they're melting.
Yeah.
They're just, and boas are not like that. Boas are structured, muscular. Not that retics and berms aren't. Don't get me wrong. For all the people that are getting ready to crush me,
boy.
Episode 1. He is an idiot. But boas are very structured. Their body is very structured. You can see muscles and things working typically in boas, and so you want to keep that composition.
Yeah,
that's another thing about the cage. You know, if you provide them animals with a cage tall enough to climb, they get a lot of exercise by climbing around their cage.
Oh yeah. It's got to be good for them because like I have all this grapevine.
Yeah.
Actually lag screwed to the side of the cage. That way it's not in contact with the substrate and molding, and man, my boas love going up on that and then just looking down, and just like watching for an animal to go by or whatever's going on in their mind. You can tell that they're getting something out of it. If it wasn't there, they'd be missing that.
Sure, absolutely. I think there's in the wild, I'm speculating, but there's some security with elevation. Birds are always an issue no matter where you are, but I think they feel safer in the trees and all that stuff. And they do like hanging out. I mean, most of my snakes, given the choice, these retics would all climb if I gave them the option. But that's the last thing I need is a retic looking down from me from the sky.
Yeah. So, all right. So, coming up on the last two questions here, how often should you handle a newer snake? I mean, like let's look at it from the perspective of you just got a new snake and it's under a year old. How much is too much? How much should you be handling?
So if you take I just got it and it's only been here 2 weeks equation out, because you shouldn't handle it much then. And if you and then we'll talk about feeding. So if you feed your snake, don't handle it for a few days. Let it have a chance to digest that meal out. And especially red tails, because they already have a propensity and a possibility of being rare of regurgitation. You don't want to help that along with undue handling after they eat. I don't want people to think that's a real issue. It's just something that's there. So any snake, you don't want
it to be an issue. Yeah.
Right. So other than that, I'm not 100% sure. I've got I know right now there's a choice-based handling thing out there, and people are going to be like, well, that's the old school mentality coming out of about what I'm about to say. But I paid for you. I heat you. I feed you. I bought you this enclosure, and the choice to handle you is mine. And it's not yours. So if I want to touch you, I'm going to, because you get to lay in that cage 23 hours a day without me messing with you.
Yeah.
If I want to touch you, I will. So that's the
yeah. And, I feel like that would work really well with some snakes, but not others. My boas, they move in slow motion. If you open up a boa's cage, they will come out, but it's going to be hours. Like they'll stick their head out of the hide and then slowly come over and then like stick their head out a little bit and be like, wow, it's kind of nice out there, and it's this whole thing that, they don't move the way we move, like if we want to go outside, we're outside in 45 seconds, know, but, and my Timor pythons, if I did that with my Timor pythons, I'd never hold them, and I want to socialize them because I don't want them to live up to their reputation. You know, I don't want them to poop and pee every time I touch them or bite me if once they get bigger, you know, so the choice is mine.
Me, I would put a spin on that question. For me, it's not per day when or if you should handle them. I think it's the longevity that you handle them when you do. So if you want to get your snake out every day, when you come home from work and your stress relief from the commute and all the bullshit is to get my snake out and check it out for a little bit, fine. But if you've handled that snake for 5 hours, you know, from the time you go home to work till 9 o'clock at night, that's probably too much. But if you handle that snake for 15 or 20 minutes every single day, I don't think that's a problem, honestly. And they get used to it. They're like, oh God, look, he's coming.
Yeah.
But if it's like hours, that's a lot.
Yeah, for sure. And I do that, you know, I'll come home every day and hold a snake. I don't know which one it's going to be, you know, and it might be 3 or 4 different snakes, and but it's probably only going to be 5 or 10 minutes, you know, take them out, get a look at them, see how they're doing, especially when it's like 2 or 3 days after feeding, you know, I want to see how they're digesting and get a gauge on that too. So we've talked about regurgitation with the Peruvians and Surinam Boas. What are some other potential health problems you can run into? And we talked about IBD too. And we kind of already put that away. Like, you know, it's not something you should be too worried about anymore.
I wouldn't worry about it. Keep your collection clean. Keep it free of parasites and vectors, your word, and you're going to be fine. I wouldn't worry about it. So I got to be honest with you here. I mean, there's not a lot. Reptile boas are hardy. I mean, if your parameters are right, your animal's not going to get respiratory infections, all that stuff. You're going to run into, you know, the issue where it snags a tooth on some substrate and it potentially swallows a piece of bark with its meal that might stress you out as a new keeper, you know, or something like that. But they're pretty hardy. That doesn't mean that just like humans, you know, you don't get a cold in July for some strange reason, and you know, or whatever. But if that happens, you go to a vet and you take care of it and you reevaluate and be prepared, because if that's going to ask, if the vet's worth anything, he's going to ask you the questions. How's this animal kept? You know, and be prepared for that. Take a picture of your cage, shoot your thumb and you know, and take that information to the vet with it.
Yeah.
But if that happens, then deal with it. If you end up, you know, we've all bought a dog, a hamster, a guinea pig, whatever, you know, and something was just wrong with them. It's always possible you can get a snake that has some sort of illness, some sort of thing that just causes it to not be a thriving animal.
Yeah.
Or whatever. So aside from that, if you've gotten a good quality animal, you really shouldn't run into too many problems. And if you keep your temperatures right and you don't overfeed, and not in quantity necessarily, but in size, you really probably never have to worry about regurgitation either. You know, it's not a huge issue. The issue from regurgitation comes is once it starts, it's very hard to stop. But if you do everything right, you're never going to have to worry about it. So don't let me mentioning it 3 or 4 times throw you. It's fine. Just do your job the right way, and you'll never have to worry about it.
Something else.
It's not like your dog, you know. I mean, you can't feed it and go play ball with it, you know. After a couple of days, you know. And
I can't do that with my dog either. He'll puke. But with him, he'll throw up and then be like, "All right, let's get back to playing ball now." You know, I'll get to eat my throw up in a couple minutes, and then we can play some more.
We'll get back to it, right? Yeah. So I can't say that there's a lot with most snakes are pretty hardy, really. I mean, there's not a lot to worry about.
RIs, in your opinion, are they brought on by too cold, too hot, too dry, too humid?
Yes. I think all those factors can play into it. Too dry, certainly. I'm not going to mention any breeders by name, but there are people that I like and follow, and they will have literally water running down the walls of their cages. I mean, the glass is so wet you can't see into the snake. That's not good. And people will say, well, they come from the rainforest. Yes, but that rain and that moisture happens with fresh air and air circulation and wind and movement and all these different things. And the snake having the ability to move to an environment that it wants to be in more freely.
Mm-hmm.
And too much humidity is humidity, but just straight up moisture, water, wetness. This is not necessarily a great thing. You know, in the wild, it rains on them and then it kind of dries out. And they have the rest of the day to go crawl about and do their thing. So too much of any extreme is bad. You know, so, you know, here in Virginia, you know, in the wintertime, when the heat's on all the time, your house gets really dry. Your skin's dry. You can scratch yourself and see the marks, you know, and you either buy a humidifier or just be dry. You know, so if you're going to keep these animals, then understand there's parameters. I keep going back to that. There's humidity parameters, there's temperature parameters. And if you go outside of those dramatically for any amount of time, you're going to cause problems. RIs are the notorious illness that most snakes suffer. And if it's really, really dry and your bedding is dust and they're breathing dust and they're doing stuff, they're going to get an RI. If it's super, super wet and they're living with mold in their cage, they're going to get an RI. And it's not the end of the world. Okay, your snake's got an RI. Go get medicine, fix the problem, move forward.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on that. You know, you talked about having one of the top vets, you know, and the cost of having one of the top vets. But if you're dealing with not a really big problem, something like an RI where you just need a prescription for some antibiotics, you know, find out if it's, you know, fungal or bacterial or whatever. If you're a new keeper, it's important, in my opinion. I think that if you're buying these animals, you need to be prepared for that cost, you know, and you had talked before about like a top tier vet being very high cost, but a regular reptile vet, you know, you might have to drive 30 minutes or an hour, depending on where you're at. I know for me, it's about 45 minutes. But he's a good vet and the cost is pretty low. You know, to deal with a RI that I had come up, it was, I think, $150.
Right.
And that was everything. That was the visit. That was talking to him. That was medication out the door, you know, and very caring. Let us know what happens. We might have to go this route instead, blah, blah, blah. Keep us up to date. You know, they were really nice, very high level service.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that gets touched on enough. Like, you know, if you're getting a snake, be prepared. Something may come up that's minor where you need to go to a vet.
Yeah. And for me, you know, I had a whole history of this from a long time ago. So when I started to get back into it, the first thing I did was look in Winchester, who even does reptiles. You know, Scott Stahl is in Fairfax. He's 60 miles down the road, and it's a new schedule to get in to see him. So I can call and be like, I got a sick snake. Can I come in tomorrow? You know, Scott's got a team, and they're reptile experts. And I want to preface that by also saying you don't need that if you're just a keeper. I mean, you know, top tier vets come in with disease, egg impaction, crazy shit that happens to a snake if you're, you know, a breeder. That as a keeper, you're never going to run into egg impaction, you know, or whatever, and stuff like that. That's where you get into, you know, they hurt themselves and their spine's kinked. What are you doing? You know, if you just got a pet snake, your pet reptile vet in your town is fine. So don't stress over $500 an hour for Scott Stahl. You know, you don't need that.
Yeah, it's not going to be what the normal keeper is going to
No. So, but I would say, so what I did was I didn't know. I've had dogs and cats and all kinds of stuff here, and I know who my dog and cat vet was, but they didn't do snakes. I had to find the snake vet in my town, and they don't even list it on there. They just have a vet that does reptiles if one comes in. And so that's who I use. And knock on wood, I don't need them very often, but that person that I deal with loves reptiles so much. And this is such an anomaly for Winchester, Virginia, that they'll come to my house. And I just have like once a year come out and just check stuff, you know, and we'll just go through a couple things and look at whatever. You know, if a boa throws a weird gray stool or something, I'll be like, what's up? You know, and we'll go on. So, but yes, if you have animals, you're going to need a vet.
All right. I think that's just about everything that wraps up the care guide portion. So I appreciate that.
No problem. Hopefully it's useful for someone.
I think it will be. So the last question I have for you before we wrap up, what's your favorite snake of all time? It doesn't have to be something that you own. It can be venomous. Favorite snake.
Favorite snake? I mean, that is a tough one because I like all snakes, really, but the one part of me wants to go toward Bolin's pythons, but after talking to, or after listening to Nick Mutton talk a few times, I kind of have a different perspective on those. But favorite snake, I have to say my boas are my favorite snake. I love them. They're awesome. Yeah. And I mean, if you're into hots and stuff, I mean, that's a whole different world.
Yeah.
Temple vipers and the colors and all the stuff you can get into or whatever. It's just never really been an option for me. I never really wanted to deal with them any and stuff. But like my Peruvian and my Surinam boas, I mean, they're awesome. And they're for me perfect. I'm going to end up with a 7-foot snake that's kind of heavy, that's easy to hold, wants to interact with me, has a beautiful blood red tail, some chocolate saddles and pinks and stuff through his head, has a big robust head. It's just an awesome snake. So for me, if somebody told me I had to get rid of everything today and keep one, I'd keep my one of my red tail boas.
Nice.
Yeah. So and I mean, some people say, well, that's a boring answer, and I mean, I guess I could jump in, but I've had it all, man. I mean, I didn't even touch on all the stuff. I've bred frogs, lizards, dark frogs. I mean, I've had it all. I've had anacondas. I've had it all, and to me, the red tail boas are just awesome. They're really cool, and I love my retics and stuff. I almost sit here and think, could I deal with not having a retic around? Because I really do like them. It's a different experience, a different ownership experience. Retics, the way they interact with you and everything. But if I could only have one, and the perfect snake is like a red tail boa.
Nice. Yeah. I'm gonna turn that into a YouTube short. Put it all over the place.
The idiot said.
I gotta swap that. Maybe I should just change the name to the idiot and the expert.
The idiot and the expert. There you go. Well, all I'll say is that I know who some of your future guests are, and some of your future guests will probably not want to be the idiot.
Yeah. I know it's not meant to be that way.
I know it's not, and I've only exploited it because it's an easy scab to pick.
I know. All right, man. Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate you taking the time and sitting down with me and being on episode 1.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And yeah,
yes, you have a lot to live up to.
Yeah, for sure. I think we're coming up on 3 hours and 15 minutes. Right. But we had some malfunctions along the way. So
yeah, I'm sure you'll cut that down. This will be a 32-minute video. I'll be like,
yeah. I'm hoping for like 16 minutes. All right, Kenny, I appreciate it. And
I got one more thing I'd like to say.
Yeah.
And the last thing I'd like to say is I appreciate you doing this. From the old guy perspective, we're used to have to beg, borrow, and steal for information and read books and all that stuff. The people that are putting themselves out there, spending the money on the equipment and out there soliciting people's time to provide information. What a time to be alive in the reptile industry, honestly. Yeah. And most of the people that watch this, unless they're as old as I am, won't appreciate what this is fully, like somebody who came from it and had to figure it out over the course of a couple, 2 or 3 years. You can watch 5 different podcasts and from top tier people, not me, but the others, and get a plethora of information. So I'd like to just say on episode 1, kudos for you for kicking this off and having the balls to do it and put the investment in and do it. So awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it was nauseating, and my wife was very supportive, and there was a fair amount of money that went into it as an investment, and every single time I take one step forward, I would think, what am I doing? I'm such an idiot. I have no authority. I shouldn't be doing this. But I'm very passionate about the animals, and I absolutely love talking to people and hearing how they keep. There is no right way or wrong way. I mean, there definitely is. I shouldn't have said that. I take that back. There's definitely when you're, like you said, within the parameters, there's so many different ways to keep these animals and to do it successfully. And that's all I'm interested in doing, is talking to people and seeing how they keep and why they keep that way and what their experience has been.
Well, to give the world, access to the Nick Muttons, to the Ryan Youngs, and whoever, you eventually end up on this podcast is invaluable. It's invaluable. Yeah. I mean, it's a ton of information. I'm a guy that's just been around a long time. So I've been there, done that. So I can supply a lot of people information. And if I give you advice on Facebook, it's probably good, solid, sound advice or whatever. But if you want to take this further and hear from experts, I mean, this is the place people go to do it, and it's awesome. So anyway, I'll shut up so we can get the video ended. But cool, man.
No, I appreciate that, and I'm super excited. And it was, I mean, the first time I asked somebody, I must have written out the message like 20 times and then deleted it and thought, I am so stupid. What am I doing right now? This is so dumb. But it's like just getting used to rejection is probably a healthy thing anyway, and hopefully over time, this will turn into a legitimate resource for people. That whole Surinam and Peruvian part is going to be cut out and made into its own video, and I hope it helps somebody. Even if it only helps one person, it would be a victory. Anyway, I appreciate you coming on, Kenny, and hopefully you'll come back on in the future and we'll talk about more stuff. I'd actually like to talk to you about emeralds. That would be fun.
Oh yeah, man. Awesome snakes. So, and from the same area as Surinam and stuff. So
nice.
Yeah.
All right, man. Thank you.
Yes, sir.